Welcome, welcome. You're here at Omni Wizard. Today we present to you, what if Harry Potter tapped into the Speed Force and rewrote the night his parents died? Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1. The night that ran backward, the wind came off the moors like it had somewhere to be. It moved through Godric's Hollow the way October wind always did, stripping the last of the leaves from the old oaks along the lane, sending them spiraling past the darkened windows of houses where families were tucked in, warm and oblivious. Jack-o'-lanterns grinned from porches. Children in costume were already home, sorted through their hall, half asleep in front of the fire. It was the kind of night that felt like an ending, though nobody on the street could have told you why. Number 12, Godric's Hollow was lit from within. Inside, the sitting room was warm and slightly chaotic in the way that all homes with a 1-year-old are chaotic. A toy broom in the corner, a stack of wizarding picture books on the coffee table, a small orange pumpkin Harry had apparently decided belonged on the floor rather than the shelf where Lily had put it twice already. The wireless in the corner was playing something soft and instrumental. James Potter was sitting cross-legged on the hearthrug with his son in his lap, doing what he'd been doing for the last 20 minutes, trying to get Harry to go to sleep. Harry was not going to sleep. He sat in his father's lap with his dark hair already misbehaving in every direction. His green eyes, Lily's eyes, James thought, every time with a kind of helpless gratitude, fixed on the fire with an expression of complete and serious attention, as though the flames were telling him something important. He'd been like that all evening, quieter than usual. Not upset, not fussing, just watching, with that particular stillness he got sometimes that made James feel irrationally like his son was much older than one. Bed, James told him gently. That's the word I'm looking for, bed, sleep, unconsciousness. Harry turned his head and looked at him. Your mother will tell you I'm funny, James said. She says it under her breath and she makes a face, but she says it. He's not wrong, Lily called from the kitchen. The face is part of it, James grinned. Harry watched the fire. The wireless shifted, something with a faster tempo now, something almost jazzy, and James moved to stand, gathering Harry against his shoulder. The boy went without protest, fingers curling into James's shirt with the automatic, trusting grip that still made James's chest do something complicated every single time. He carried him toward the stairs, pausing at the kitchen doorway. Lily was standing at the counter with a cup of tea, not drinking it, just holding it. She was looking out the window above the sink. The light from the kitchen caught the red of her hair, the line of her jaw, the particular set of her shoulders that James had learned to read over years, and what he read now was that she was thinking about something she hadn't decided to say yet. You all right? He asked. She turned. Smiled at him, the real one, the one that reached her eyes. Fine, just it's Halloween. It is. The words feel strong tonight. James leaned against the doorframe. Dumbledore personally, I know. She looked down at her tea. I know, I'm not worried, I wanted to say it. He crossed the kitchen and kissed the top of her head. Harry, from his position on James's shoulder, made a small sound of either approval or general commentary. Lily laughed quietly, genuinely, and touched the back of Harry's hand with 2 fingers. Bed, she told him. For real this time. Harry looked at his mother. His expression did something, Lily couldn't name it. A kind of focus that was almost adult, almost searching, like he was memorizing her face. Then it passed, and he yawned enormously, and James laughed and carried him up the stairs. Lily stood in the kitchen for a moment after they were gone. She was not afraid. The wards held. Dumbledore had cast them himself, and Dumbledore was, whatever else you said about Albus Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard alive. Peter had the secret, and Peter was safe, and the safe house was safe, and she was not afraid. She put her tea down and went upstairs to put her son to bed. Harry's bedroom was small and yellow, pale yellow walls, a mobile of stars and moons rotating slowly above his cot, a stuffed stag in the corner that James had given him and that Harry had with some seriousness named Duh. The name had been both touching and slightly deflating. James sat on the edge of the cot's frame while Lily settled Harry down. Harry's green eyes were heavy now, the fire-watching tiredness finally catching up with him. He looked up at the mobile. The little stars rotated. His hand was wrapped around Lily's finger. There you go, she murmured. There's my boy. His eyes closed. They stood there for a moment in the quiet yellow room, watching him breathe. James put his arm around Lily's shoulder and she leaned into him, and neither of them said anything because there wasn't anything to say. This was the thing you couldn't put into words, this exact configuration of people in this exact room, the smallness of their son's sleeping face, the stupid perfect warmth of the moment. Some things you just had to stand inside of. They went downstairs. They did not hear the crack of apparition outside. They did not hear the soft, deliberate footstep on the path. But the wards, Dumbledore's wards, the wards that held, the wards that were supposed to hold, they fell like a house of cards in a strong wind, because Peter Pettigrew had given the address to Lord Voldemort at 6 o'clock that evening, and some sacrifices, once made, cannot be unmade. The front door blew off its hinges. James moved before the sound had finished echoing. There was no wand on him. It was upstairs on the nightstand. He'd set it down when he carried Harry, and he'd been an idiot. He'd been comfortable and warm, and he'd been an idiot. But James Potter had been an Auror and a marauder, and he didn't need a wand to be dangerous. He just needed a second. He got half of one. Voldemort moved through the doorway the way darkness moves, not rushing, not hesitating, simply present, the way a winter cold front is present. He was tall. He was pale in a way that had gone beyond human pallor into something genuinely other. His robes were black, his eyes were red, and they didn't catch the firelight the way eyes should. He looked at James Potter with an expression of mild, genuine contempt. "Stand aside," he said. His voice was soft. That was the worst part, how soft it was, how reasonable, as though he were asking James to move out of the way of a doorway. "Stand aside, Potter, I'm not here for you." "Like hell," James said. He threw himself sideways, grabbed the lamp from the side table, hurled it not at Voldemort but at the window beside him. The glass exploded outward. The noise was enormous. He was buying seconds, just enough time. Lily, take Harry and run. Stop, don't look back. How tiresome, Voldemort said, and the curse hit James like a wall. He was dead before he hit the floor. It happened that fast, that simply. Avada Kedavra is not cruel in the way that cruelty usually works. It is not painful. It does not linger. It simply ends things. James Potter, who had laughed too loudly and loved too much and been sorry for it and not sorry for it in equal measure, was gone before his knees buckled. Voldemort stepped over him. Lily heard the crash. She heard James shout. She was already at Harry's door, already through it, already lifting him from the cot with her heart slamming against her ribs. He woke immediately, those green eyes snapping open, and she saw them for a single instant before she was moving toward the window, the door, anywhere, the door blew inward. She spun. Harry was against her chest, her arm locked around him. She faced Voldemort across the small yellow room, the stars still rotating slowly above the empty cot, the stuffed stag in the corner, and she did not run. She was afraid. She was terrified. But she had done the math, and the math had run out, and there was nothing left but this, so she made herself stand up straight and she faced him. "Not Harry," she said. Her voice shook only a little. "Take me instead. Take me, please, not my son. Stand aside, girl." Same soft voice, same mild contempt. "Stand aside. Your son has something I require, and a sacrifice doesn't change the. Then take it from me." She shifted, putting herself fully between Voldemort and the cot, and her voice was steadier now, the fear converting into something older and more absolute. "You'll have to go through me." Something moved in Voldemort's red eyes. It might have been frustration. It might have been the faintest, most reluctant flicker of recognition, the look of a man who has encountered something he didn't account for. He had not expected this. He was not used to things he hadn't expected. "Avada Kedavra," he said. The green light hit her. She fell, and then Voldemort turned to Harry. The boy was standing in the cot. He should not have been standing. He was one, barely one. Babies don't stand on their own in cots when they've just been startled awake. But Harry James Potter was standing, both small hands gripping the rail, and he was looking at Voldemort with an expression that was, and this was the thing that made even Lord Voldemort pause for half a second, not fear, not confusion, not the animal blankness of a child who didn't understand. He was looking at him. Directly, steadily, the way you look at something you already know. "Curious," Voldemort said softly to no one. He raised his wand. Avada Kedavra. The green light crossed the room, and something in Harry's chest ignited. It didn't have a name, not yet. It didn't have a shape or a color or a logic. It was simply the deepest thing in him, something older than his bones, older than the magic in his blood, older than the lineage and the prophecy and the scar he hadn't earned yet. It had been sleeping there since before he was born, coiled in the center of everything, and when the killing curse struck it like a match against a stone, it woke up. The speed force does not begin gently. The green light hit Harry, and the speed force hit back, and the collision was not loud. It was silent, more silent than the room had been all night, a silence that pressed against the ears like pressure at the bottom of the ocean. Green light stopped, hung in the air for a single, impossible instant, then it reversed. Voldemort had less than a second to process this before his own killing curse returned to him. The expression on his face, if you could have frozen it, if you could have examined it, was not fear, because Lord Voldemort had constructed himself around the premise that he did not fear. It was something more honest, surprise, pure, unguarded, for the first time in years, surprise. The curse hit him. His body fell. His soul, that shredded, horcruxed, barely held together thing, screamed out into the night like a broken string snapping, and Lord Voldemort was gone from the mortal world in a flash of his own green light, and the house began to come apart around it. But Harry was already somewhere else. The speed force opened under him like a current catches a leaf, except Harry was not a leaf. Harry was the current. He ran. He couldn't see, couldn't speak, was operating on something below instinct, pure kinetic cosmic imperative. And he ran backward, through the fabric of the last hour, through his mother's voice and his father's laughter and the rotating stars above the yellow cot, all of it streaming past him in gold-white light, and he felt everything that had happened crystallizing in him the way dreams crystallize when you're waking up, vivid and irreversible, his mother falling, his father falling, the green light, the silence. He felt all of it, and he kept running, because the speed force had shown him something that magic alone cannot offer, the understanding that this was not the end of the road. This was a branch point, a seam in time, and if you moved fast enough, if you moved correctly, he stopped. He was in his cot, yellow walls, stars rotating. His mother and father downstairs, the wireless playing something jazzy, everything intact and warm and ordinary. It was October 31st, 1981. 7:43 p.m. Harry James Potter, age 1 year and 3 months, sat in his cot in the dark, breathing. He was not crying. He was thinking, or doing something that would become thinking when he was older, something that even now had a shape and a weight to it. He had just watched his parents die. He had just run backward through time, alone, at 1 year old, carrying the memory of the worst thing he would ever see. He sat with it for a long moment. Then he climbed out of his cot, which he'd figured out 2 weeks ago and had been diplomatically keeping from his parents, padded across the room in his socked feet, opened the door and went downstairs. James saw him first because James was facing the stairs. "Harry," he got up from the hearthrug. "Hey, you're supposed to be. Come here, what's wrong?" He crouched down to Harry's level. Harry walked straight to him with a focus and a steadiness that, James told himself later, should have been his first clue. He put both hands on James's face. He looked at him with those green eyes for a long, serious, searching moment. James laughed, confused. "Bud, what are you doing?" Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, saw Harry, and her expression shifted immediately into that particular maternal frequency that read the room faster than language. "What happened?" "He came downstairs," James said, looking back at Harry. He's fine, I think. He's just." Harry turned and looked at his mother. Same thing. Same serious, searching look. The same assessment that was, God, it was unsettling, James thought, and then felt immediately guilty for thinking it, because what was unsettling about your kid looking at you? But it was the quality of it, the weight of it, like being looked at by someone who had been somewhere and come back. Lily crossed the room and crouched down beside James. "Hi, baby," she said softly. "What's wrong? Did you have a bad dream?" Harry's expression did something complicated. Then he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against his mother's. The gesture was so deliberate, so completely unlike the random, uncoordinated affection of a toddler, that Lily went completely still. She put her arms around him. "There you go," she whispered. I've got you. Harry let her hold him, and over his mother's shoulder his eyes were open, and he was thinking, the way a 1-year-old thinks, in impressions and colors and feels rather than words, but with a new current of gold-white underneath all of it, about what came next. He had the memory. He had the time. He had the speed force like a river under his feet, waiting. He was not going to waste any of it. At 8:14, James went upstairs to get his wand, just to check the wards. He said, just to be sure, the way you double-check the stove before bed. He didn't say what was nagging at him. He wasn't sure he could name it. He checked the wards and they were intact, and he was upstairs for less than 4 minutes. While he was gone, Harry sat in his mother's lap in the warm sitting room, and he felt it, the shift, the approach, the cold edge of what was coming. He felt it in the speed force, the way you feel a storm coming in your chest before the clouds arrive. He stood up. "Harry," Lily said. He pointed at the window, then at the door. Then he looked at his mother with an expression that was, later, years later, when she had context for it, the look of a 5-star general making a decision. Then he opened his mouth and said very clearly, very deliberately, "Up." Lily stared at him. He hadn't said that word before. He had words, a dozen or so, the normal vocabulary of a 1-year-old, but not that one. "Up," she repeated. He pointed upstairs, then he pointed at her, then he pointed at himself. Lily Evans Potter was one of the most brilliant witches of her generation, and she had been watching her son for 13 months, and she trusted her gut. She picked him up. She stood. "James," she called. James's footsteps on the stairs. "Yeah, come down here, now, don't ask questions." He appeared at the bottom of the stairs, wand in hand, reading her face. He didn't ask questions. They stood together in the sitting room, the three of them, and 30 seconds later the front door blew off its hinges. This time was different. James had his wand. He had 3 seconds of warning, 3 seconds of his wife's certainty and his son's pointing finger, and 3 seconds is a tremendous amount of time if you are James Potter, who had spent 3 years in active combat against the darkest wizard the world had seen. He was already casting before Voldemort was through the doorway. The fight was not elegant, it was not cinematic. It was brutal and fast and loud, spells cracking against the walls, furniture exploding, Voldemort impassive and controlled and terrifyingly powerful. But James was not alone in the room, and Lily had her wand now, and 2 trained combat wizards fighting side by side in a small room against a single opponent. Even Lord Voldemort changes the math. Harry, held against Lily's chest while she cast over his head with her free hand, watched all of it. He watched Voldemort's eyes. He watched the moment when Voldemort stopped being mildly contemptuous and started being genuinely engaged, genuinely present in the fight in a way he clearly hadn't expected to need to be. He watched his father take a cutting hex to the shoulder and keep casting. He watched his mother create a shield charm of such density that Voldemort's next 3 spells simply died against it. And he felt the speed force in him, steady and vast, like a river that knew where it was going. Voldemort's eyes moved to Harry. Voldemort, whatever else, was brilliant. He understood in the way brilliant people understand things, instinctively and completely, that the child was the problem. Whatever had happened to his wand when he'd pointed it at this boy in the other timeline, the timeline that no longer existed except in the memory of the boy himself, the child was the variable. He didn't know why, he didn't know how, but he had survived long enough to recognize when something didn't fit the pattern. He stopped fighting the Potters. He raised his wand at Harry. Avada Kedavra. The gold-white light came out of Harry like a shockwave. It wasn't the killing curse reversed this time. Harry was awake and aware, and on some level that would take years to fully understand, choosing. The Speed Force didn't just deflect Voldemort's curse. It hit Voldemort like a wall of kinetic force moving at speeds the human body isn't designed to experience, picked him up, and threw him through the front wall of the house. The night air came in through the hole. Dust settled. Lily and James stood in the wreckage of their sitting room. The wireless was still playing. Somehow, the jazz had shifted to something slow and slightly mournful, which felt accurate. The stuffed stag from Harry's room had made its way downstairs at some point during the fight and was sitting in the corner, looking on. Voldemort was in the garden. He was alive, his Horcruxes wouldn't let him be otherwise, but his body was battered and his soul was horrified and he had not yet processed what had just happened. He was getting there. James took 3 steps toward the hole in the wall, wand raised. "Don't," Lily said quietly. "Not yet." James stopped. "Why not?" Lily looked at Harry. Harry looked back at her. "Because," she said slowly, "I don't think Tom Riddle is actually the priority right now." James turned and looked at her properly, looked at what she was holding, which was his son, who had just put a crack in the side of Lord Voldemort that nobody in 15 years of war had managed, and who was now watching his mother with perfect calm. "What is he?" James said, quietly, without fear, with the specific quality of voice you use when you're asking a question you don't have a category for. "Ours," Lily said. "He's ours." Harry reached up and patted his mother's cheek. The gesture was small and warm and completely at odds with the last 4 minutes. Lily laughed, a short, disbelieving sound, half tears. Outside in the garden, there was a sound like a thunderclap. Voldemort had gone. What was left of him, the vapor, the shred, the furious, confused scrap of soul had fled into the October night, and Godric's Hollow was quiet. James lowered his wand. The 3 of them stood together in their broken sitting room in the house they hadn't had to flee and breathed. The leaf from the old oak was caught on the windowsill. The wireless played on. Harry yawned. "Yeah," James said after a long, long moment. I think bed is the right call, mate." Voldemort had fled, not destroyed, not yet, and they both understood that. The war wasn't over. The Horcruxes were out there, and the Death Eaters were out there, and the wizarding world was about to wake up on November 1st to find that something had changed without anyone knowing quite what. There would be questions. There would be chaos. There would be Dumbledore. But tonight, James Potter carried his son upstairs to the small yellow room with the rotating stars and set him in his cot, and Harry looked up at the mobile with the expression of someone who had somewhere to be and had decided it could wait until morning. His father sat on the edge of the cot frame. "I don't know what just happened," James said quietly. "But I want you to know, whatever you are, whatever that was, it doesn't change anything, all right? You're my kid, full stop." Harry looked at him. "You won't remember this," James said. "You're one, so you won't remember any of it, which is probably fine, probably healthy." He rubbed the back of his neck. "But I'll remember." Harry's eyes closed. But he would remember. He would always remember. Every detail, every face, every second. his mother falling in a timeline that didn't exist anymore, his father's voice shouting from the bottom of the stairs, the feeling of running backward through the dark with gold-white light in his chest and nowhere to go but home. He would carry it. The Speed Force had given him that, along with everything else. James sat with him until his breathing slowed. Then he went back downstairs to find his wife standing in the broken doorway, looking out at the garden where Lord Voldemort had stood, and they stood together for a long time without saying anything, while the October wind moved through Godric's Hollow and carried the last of the leaves down the lane. In the morning, owls would come. The Ministry would scramble. Dumbledore would arrive with his half-moon glasses and his terrifyingly perceptive eyes, and the very long process of explaining would begin. But that was morning. Tonight, the Potters were alive, all three of them. Chapter 2, The Boy Who Ran 4 Years is a long time to be in hiding when the thing you were hiding from is gone. Not destroyed, gone. That was the distinction that kept Albus Dumbledore up at night, that filled 3 full inches of parchment in his private journals, that made him set down his lemon drop and stare at the middle distance during order meetings. Voldemort had been defeated before, temporarily, by the love magic Lily had accidentally invoked. That was the theory Dumbledore had built, carefully and painstakingly, from the wreckage of Godric's Hollow. It fit, it was elegant. It was the kind of magic that made sense in the context of everything he knew about ancient protective enchantments and sacrificial love. The problem was that it didn't explain the hole in the wall. Love magic didn't put holes in walls. Love magic didn't throw the most powerful dark wizard in a century through solid stone. Love magic was a shield, not a battering ram, and whatever had happened in the Potter sitting room on October 31st, 1981, had been emphatically, undeniably a battering ram. He'd examined the site himself, the scorch marks, the displaced stone, the traces of an energy signature that didn't match anything in his considerable experience, something that moved through the ambient magic of the house like a current through water, leaving everything around it undisturbed and yet fundamentally changed, as though the very time in that room had been bent slightly off its axis. He'd thought about this for 4 years. He was still thinking about it. The Potters had moved twice since Godric's Hollow, once immediately to a safe house in Wiltshire, and then 8 months later to a cottage in the Scottish Highlands, far enough from everywhere to be genuinely private, close enough to Hogwarts that Dumbledore could flew in 10 minutes if necessary. The Fidelius charm was in place, with Sirius Black as secret keeper, which arrangement Sirius had declared non-negotiable in a voice that hadn't invited discussion. The cottage was low and stone, and surrounded by moorland, purple heather in summer, frost-tipped and stark in winter, the kind of landscape that didn't care what you thought of it. James had complained about the isolation for approximately 3 weeks before discovering that the moors were excellent for flying. Lily had complained about it for approximately 1 day, before setting up a very serious home laboratory in the back room and losing herself in research that she declined to characterize as obsessive. Harry had never complained at all. He was 5 now and the moors were his. He ran them every morning, not jogging, not the dawdling exploratory walk of a 5-year-old following a path. He ran, full out, flat out, gold-white lightning crackling off his heels, covering ground that would take a grown adult 30 minutes in roughly 45 seconds. He ran in big looping circuits around the cottage, always coming back, never going far enough to worry his parents, but moving with the ease and joy of something that had been built for exactly this. A bird in its first real air current, a fish in deep water. Lily watched him from the kitchen window every morning with a cup of tea and an expression that was equal parts wonder and something she'd privately labeled productive terror, because she was a scientist at heart and Harry was, professionally speaking, an ongoing phenomenon. She had 3 notebooks full of observations. She hadn't shown them to Dumbledore. James watched from the doorway with his coffee, and his expression was simpler. Just pride. Just that particular paternal pride that doesn't need anything added to it. "He's faster than yesterday," James said, one November morning when Harry was a white and gold blur across the far ridge. "He's faster than yesterday every day," Lily said. "It's not linear, it's accelerating." Is that a problem? Lily thought about it. Genuinely thought about it, the way she thought about potions interactions and ancient runes carefully, methodically, without the comfort of rushing to a conclusion. "I don't know," she said finally. "I don't think so. I think it's just what it is." "What it is," James repeated. He watched Harry round the far edge of the property line and come blazing back, the lightning carving lines in the frost-tipped heather. "Right." Harry came to a stop 10 feet from the cottage door. Not a sliding stop, not a stumbling one, just a clean, immediate halt, as though he'd simply decided the forward motion was complete. He stood in the cold November morning, chest barely heaving, and looked up at his father with a grin that was so thoroughly James Potter's grin that Lily had to look away before she felt something too large for the kitchen. "I beat my time," Harry announced. "Did you?" "By a lot." He held up both hands with the gravity of a sports analyst. "A significant lot." James laughed. "Get in here and eat your breakfast, significant lot." Harry was not a typical 5-year-old. This was not a statement about his power. Power alone doesn't make someone atypical, it just makes them powerful. What made Harry atypical was the memory. He'd been told once by Sirius, who'd been slightly drunk on fire whiskey and therefore more honest than usual, that he had the eyes of someone who's been somewhere. Sirius had laughed after saying it, the way you laugh when you've said something truer than you meant to. Harry had nodded, because what do you say to that when you're 5, and you know exactly what it means? He remembered the other timeline, the way you remember a dream you've had 100 times, not with perfect clarity, not in every detail, but with absolute certainty about the shape of it. The green light, his mother falling, the silence after. He carried it not as a wound but as a fixed point, the way sailors carry the position of the North Star, not because the star is where they're going, but because it tells them exactly where they are. He did not talk about it. He was 5. He understood instinctively that there were things the Speed Force had given him that were for him alone, not out of secrecy or shame, but out of simple jurisdiction. This was his. The running was visible. The memory was not. What he did talk about was everything else, because Harry was also, underneath the cosmic inheritance and the borrowed future memory, a perfectly normal child who found the world deeply interesting and had a great deal to say about it. "Why do slugs come out when it rains?" he asked Lily at dinner one evening. "They need moisture to move efficiently," Lily said. "So the rain is like their speed force." Lily set down her fork. "I'm sorry, the thing that makes them go." "They're their engine." James looked at Lily. Lily looked at James. "That's," Lily said carefully, "actually quite a good analogy." Harry nodded, satisfied, and went back to his potatoes. He read everything he could get his hands on. Not because he'd been told to, not because the original timeline's version of himself had been forced through years of neglect to find refuge in books, but because the world was interesting, and books were how you found out about more of it. He'd worked through all of James's old Hogwarts textbooks by the time he was 4. He'd found Lily's research notebooks by accident at 4.5 and spent 3 days reading them with such focused intent that Lily had walked in, seen what he was doing, and sat down next to him without a word, and answered every question he asked. Those 3 days were some of the best of her life. By 5, he was asking about Horcruxes. "No," James said. "I'm not asking to make one," Harry said patiently, from his position on the sitting room floor where he was surrounded by a small fortress of open books. "I'm asking what they are. You're 5. I know what I am." "Harry, Dad." Harry looked up at him with those eyes, those green, unfathomably patient eyes. "I already know most of it. I just want the parts you know that the books don't have." James stood in the doorway and looked at his son for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and sat down on the floor next to him, back against the sofa, because this was apparently happening. "Horcrux is a way of anchoring your soul," James said. "You split it, which involves doing something so terrible that the soul actually fractures, and you anchor the fragment in an object. The object becomes a kind of failsafe. If your body dies, your soul doesn't pass on, it lingers." Harry was quiet for a moment. "How many did he make?" James went very still. "Who?" Harry looked at him. "I don't know," James said honestly. "Dumbledore has theories. He hasn't, he doesn't share everything." 7, Harry said. The silence that followed was the specific kind that happens when someone says something they shouldn't be able to know. "Harry," James said slowly, "how do you?" "I just know." Harry looked back at his books. "It's 7. One of them is already destroyed, the diary. He made it when he was 16. There's a ring, a locket, a cup, a diadem, a snake," and he stopped. His jaw was tight for a moment, and one he didn't mean to make. James was very carefully not moving, the way you stay still around something rare and fragile in case sudden movement breaks the moment. "What does that mean?" "It means," Harry said, with the precision of someone choosing words very deliberately, "that we have work to do." Sirius arrived on a Thursday with his motorbike, a bag full of Honeyjuke's chocolate, and the specific energy of someone who has been bored for exactly long enough to be dangerous. He was 31 now and looked it, still handsome in the sharp-edged, slightly too much hair way that had apparently been genetic in the Black family, and that Sirius wore in defiance of everything his birth family stood for. He'd been doing odd jobs for the Order, tracking Death Eaters, occasionally punching them, living in a flat in London that he described as charming, and that James had once visited and described as aggressively bachelor. He came through the flue in a shower of green sparks and immediately tripped over one of Harry's books, which was approximately 40% of the sitting room floor at this point. Ow, Sirius said. Watch the books, Harry said from behind his current fortress. There are books everywhere, Harry. I'd need a map. There's a system. Sirius looked at James. James shrugged in a way that said there is in fact a system, and I've stopped questioning it. Sirius stepped carefully through the literary landscape, made it to the sofa, dropped his bag, and looked at Harry with the frank, warm attention he always gave him, the attention that said you are interesting, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. So, Sirius said, your mum's letter said you've been asking about Horcruxes. Harry looked up. She told you. She tells me everything. I'm the cool godfather. He spread his hands. What do you want to know? Harry set down his book. I want to know where Voldemort's body is. Sirius's eyebrows went up. He doesn't have one, not really. He's somewhere in Albania, Harry said, in a forest. He's been possessing small animals to stay embodied. He needs a servant to restore him properly, and eventually he'll find one and he'll come back. He paused. Unless someone gets there first. Sirius stared at him. Then he looked at James. Then he looked back at Harry. You're 5, Sirius said. Everyone keeps saying that, Harry said. Dumbledore came in December. He came the way Dumbledore always came, announced at the last possible moment, with a courtesy that was so complete it was almost a form of control. He flew in on a Sunday afternoon, wearing his silver robes, his half-moon glasses catching the firelight, his long white beard impeccably maintained. He looked like what he was, the most powerful wizard alive, accustomed to being the most powerful wizard in any room, carrying that knowledge with the particular grace of someone who has been at it for long enough that the weight has become familiar. He greeted Lily and James warmly. He took his tea. He settled into the armchair by the fire with the ease of a man making a strategic choice about geography, the chair facing the room, the best sightlines, the position of authority. He had been doing this for decades without thinking about it. Harry walked in from the kitchen eating an apple, stopped when he saw Dumbledore and said, "Oh, Professor." "Hi." Dumbledore smiled his gentle smile. "Hello, Harry, you've grown." "Time does that," Harry said agreeably and sat down on the hearthrug with his apple. He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at him. The two of them regarded each other across the firelight with the specific attention of two people who are both aware that the other person is worth paying attention to. "I've heard you've been studying," Dumbledore said. "I've been reading," Harry said. "There's a difference. Studying implies a curriculum." James from the sofa made a small noise of suppressed laughter. Indeed, Dumbledore turned his teacup once in his hands, a small gesture, almost habitual. "And what have you been reading?" "Lots of things. Ancient magical theory mostly, some muggle physics, a bit of metaphysics." Harry took a bite of his apple. "I've been particularly interested in the relationship between intent and magical energy. The idea that the same spell cast by two different people with two different intentions produces quantifiably different results. That is," Dumbledore said carefully, "a fairly advanced area of study. It's interesting." Harry met his eyes. "I've also been interested in soul magic. Specifically the way a soul behaves when it's been deliberately fragmented. The temperature in the room didn't change, but something in it did." Lily and James both went very still, not because Harry had said anything wrong, but because they knew what was coming and they'd had this conversation in private and hadn't reached a conclusion about it. Dumbledore set his teacup down. His face was serene. His eyes were doing the thing they did, that searching, luminous assessment behind the twinkle, like watching a lighthouse from the water. "Is that so? You know he made 7, Harry said. It wasn't a question. "I have my theories," Dumbledore said. "It's 7, still not a question." "The diary's gone. Your theory about Lucius Malfoy is right. By the way, it was him that put it into Ginny Weasley's cauldron. But there are 5 more and a piece still in Voldemort himself." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "And there's the piece in me." The room was completely silent. Dumbledore looked at Harry. His expression hadn't moved, hadn't cracked, hadn't shifted, but something behind his eyes had changed, the way a deep current changes direction below still water. "Harry," Lily said. Her voice was quiet and controlled with effort. "I'm all right," Harry said, without looking away from Dumbledore. "I've known for a while. It's a splinter, it's not mine. It doesn't change anything about what I am." He looked at Dumbledore. "What I want to know is whether you knew." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment, long enough that the fire shifted and settled, long enough that Sirius, who had been leaning in the doorway of the kitchen pretending not to be there, exhaled sharply. "I had a theory," Dumbledore said finally. "I was not certain." "Okay," Harry said. "And what was your plan for what to do with the piece in me?" Another pause. Dumbledore turned his teacup in his hands again. "I was working toward one," he said. Harry nodded slowly. "Right." He finished his apple, set the core aside. Here's what I think. I think the piece in me can be extracted. The soul doesn't want to be fragmented. It's not natural and it's not stable. If you apply the right kind of energy to it, specifically a form of energy that moves faster than the soul fragment can anchor, you can essentially outrun it, pull it loose, eject it. He looked at his hands. I think I can do that, when I'm ready. That is, Dumbledore said slowly, an extraordinarily sophisticated piece of magical theory for a 5-year-old. I know. Harry looked up at him. There was nothing challenging in his eyes, nothing confrontational, just that particular quality of steadiness that was very specifically his own. I'm working on the rest of the Horcruxes too. I have a list. I think 4 of them we can get to without any of this needing to become a war. He tilted his head slightly. But I'd need to work with you on that, and I'd need you to be honest with me, not strategic. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. Then slowly he did something that James would remember for the rest of his life. He inclined his head, not a nod, a genuine, considered, slight bow of acknowledgement. I think, Dumbledore said, that I may owe you a considerable debt of candor. We can start small, Harry said, and smiled, and it was his father's grin, easy and warm, and nothing about it was afraid of anything. The months after Dumbledore's visit were productive in a way that felt slightly surreal. The old headmaster came back twice more before Christmas, and those conversations happened without James and Lily present, at Harry's request, which had made James want to object, and Lily put a hand on his arm and squeezed once, and James had let it go. He didn't hear what was said. He wouldn't for years. What he did know was that Dumbledore left those meetings looking differently than he arrived. Not diminished, that was the wrong word, more honest. Like a man who had been carrying an elaborate map and had been gently shown that the terrain was different from what the map described, and was deciding to look at the terrain instead. Harry spent the winter reading and running and being, in most respects, entirely normal. He played Exploding Snap with Sirius and won with a consistency that Sirius maintained was cheating, and Harry maintained was simply pattern recognition. He helped Lily in the lab, handing her ingredients with the correct timing before she asked, which she had given up questioning by February. He flew with James on the moors on the old broom James had dug out of storage, a proper broom, not the toy version, and was airborne with complete ease within 10 minutes, which James had expected, and then proceeded to be faster in the air than on the ground, which James had not. You're not using the broom properly, James said, hovering alongside him at 40 feet. I'm using it fine, Harry said, banking into a turn that left a streak of gold in the air behind him. You're using your power to compensate for technique. Is it working? Brilliantly, and that's not the point. I'll work on the technique, Harry said, and grinned and accelerated away into the gray Scottish sky, and James sat on his broom and laughed until his eyes watered, because what else did you do? In March, a letter arrived for Lily. It was from St. Mungo's Hospital, an old colleague, writing carefully with the specific oblique language of someone who wanted to convey something without being obvious about it. What it conveyed was that Peter Pettigrew had been spotted. Not caught, spotted. He'd been living as a rat with a family in Devon for the last 3 years, and someone had gotten close enough to recognize the signs before he bolted again. Lily read the letter twice, set it down, picked it up again. Harry looked up from his book across the table. He read her expression with the ease of someone who had been paying attention to his mother for 5 years and had in some sense been paying attention longer than that. I know where he is, Harry said. Lily looked at him. He'll go south, Harry said. He always goes south when he's scared. There's a farm in Sussex. He's been there before. He paused. If Sirius goes tonight, he'll catch him. Harry, Peter Pettigrew is the reason Voldemort found us, Harry said. His voice was even. Not angry, not the flat anger of suppression, but the genuine, processed calm of someone who has had 5 years to do something with a feeling. He's also the only living person who can restore Voldemort's body, so catching him matters. A lot. Lily looked at her son for a long moment. Then she reached for her wand and her quill. I'll write to Sirius, she said. Sirius caught Peter Pettigrew on a Tuesday evening in March, in a barn in Sussex, after a chase that he later described as honestly embarrassing for Peter, though I won't say it wasn't satisfying. Peter was handed to the ministry in a full body bind with 3 Aurors as witnesses, and a signed statement from Sirius that was, per the legal team, airtight enough to survive a direct assault from the Wisengamot. Sirius Black was officially exonerated on a Wednesday. He appeared at the cottage on Thursday morning with a bottle of champagne, a bag of honeydukes, and a look on his face that was trying to be casual and couldn't quite manage it, the look of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just been allowed to set it down. Harry met him at the door. Sirius looked at him. Harry looked back. You knew, Sirius said. Yes. How long? Harry tilted his head. A while. Sirius set down the champagne in the bag, and then he did something he had clearly not planned on doing, which was to crouch down and hug Harry with the specific, slightly desperate thoroughness of someone who doesn't trust themselves to say what they feel. Harry wrapped his arms around his godfather's neck and patted him on the back, which was a small, warm, perfectly Harry gesture. "Thank you," Sirius said, into the space above Harry's shoulder. "You were going to catch him eventually," Harry said. "Not without you, I wasn't." Harry pulled back, looked at him. "I know," he said simply, and picked up the bag of chocolate and went inside, and Sirius stood at the door of the cottage in the cold March morning and laughed, until it turned into something else and back into laughter again. Inside, Lily was already opening the champagne. The summer Harry turned 5 was the summer he started doing it consciously. Not the running, he'd been doing that since he could walk, the time thing. The precise, deliberate application of speed force awareness to the structure of events around him. He found he could feel time the way a good musician feels rhythm, not just the beat of the present moment, but the momentum of what had been and the shape of what was approaching. Not seeing the future. It was nothing so mystical as that. It was more like physics, the way a billiard ball's trajectory is entirely predictable if you know its speed and direction. Harry knew the speed. Harry knew the direction. What he did with that information was a choice. He made a lot of choices that summer, quietly and without announcement. He steered conversations. He timed interventions. He left a particular book where Lily would find it at the right moment, wrote a letter that arrived the day before it was needed, mentioned something casually to James that planted a seed that grew into a decision 6 weeks later. He was 5. He was also, in a functional sense, already playing a very long game. It was Lily who caught on first. She came to find him one August evening in the back garden, where he was sitting on the stone wall watching the heather go purple in the late light, and she sat next to him without preamble. "You're arranging things," she said. Harry looked at her. "You have been for months," she said. "Possibly longer." She paused. "I'm not upset. Just want you to know I see it." Harry was quiet for a moment. The heather shifted in the evening wind. "Someone has to," he said. "You're 5. I know." He looked at her sidelong, just the edge of his father's grin, just a trace. "But I've got a head start." Lily sat with this. She was not a woman who panicked in the face of things she didn't fully understand. She was a scientist and a witch and a mother, and she had long since decided that what Harry needed from her was not someone who flinched. So she didn't flinch. "Tell me," she said. "Everything you think I need to know." Harry turned to look at her. He thought for a moment. Then he talked quietly and without drama, while the sun went down over the Scottish moors and the heather went from purple to gray, and Lily listened. She asked questions. Good ones. He answered honestly. By the time they went inside, the stars were out. James looked up from the kitchen table when they came in together, read something in both their faces. "Everything all right?" Lily and Harry looked at each other. "We're working on it," Lily said. James nodded slowly. He reached for his coffee. Looked at Harry with that same directness he'd always given him, that uncomplicated, unfrightened love. "Whatever it is," he said, "I'm in." "I know," Harry said. "You always are." James set down his coffee. Is that a compliment, or are you winding me up?" "Both," Harry said, and went to bed. Chapter 3. Sparks Before the Storm. Diagon Alley in August was always slightly overwhelming, but it had never been overwhelming quite like this. Harry walked through it at 11 years old with his hands in his pockets, and the specific ease of someone who had prepared for this moment in the same way a conductor prepares for a performance, not nervously, not stiffly, but with that settled readiness that comes from knowing the score by heart. The alley moved around him in its usual organized chaos. Witches with long shopping lists, wizards arguing about cauldron grades, an owl hooting irritably from a cage outside Aeolus. A gaggle of first-years to be clustered around the Quidditch supplies window with the reverential attention of the converted. James and Lily walked on either side of him, and Sirius walked slightly behind with the energy of a man who had decided this was a family outing, and he was absolutely family, which was non-negotiable. "Madame Malkin's first," Lily said. "Then books, then wand. Then ice cream," Sirius said. "Then ice cream," Lily agreed. James was looking at the Quidditch shop window with the expression of a man fighting a private war. Harry didn't even turn his head. "We're not stopping," Harry told him. "I didn't say anything. You were about to. I was simply observing that the Nimbus 2000 is a genuinely significant, Dad." "Fine," James said, with the dignity of a defeated man. Harry had grown into himself in a way that was almost architectural. You could see the bones of who he was going to be, solid and clear under the surface of who he currently was. He was tall for 11, with his father's build beginning to emerge under the boyishness. His hair was his mother's nightmare and his own private amusement, dark and chaotic and immune to all intervention. His eyes were exactly what they'd always been, green and direct and slightly unsettling in their quality of attention, the feeling they gave of being actually, genuinely seen. He wore them lightly. He always had. Madame Malkin's was busy with the end of August rush, 3 fitting platforms occupied when they came in. Harry stepped up onto the nearest free one and let the enchanted tape measure do its work, and was watching the room with the alert, unobtrusive attention he'd long since made a habit, when the boy on the next platform said, "Hogwarts too, I suppose." Harry turned his head. Draco Malfoy was 11 years old and already very aware of himself, which was the only way to describe it. The posture, the carefully arranged expression of casual confidence, the robes that were already Malfoy robes even before they were fitted. He had his mother's pale sharpness, and something from his father that was harder to name. He looked at Harry with the assessing look of someone who had been taught to sort people quickly into categories of useful and irrelevant. Harry let him assess. He was used to people doing this. "First year," Harry said. "Same." Malfoy looked at Lily and James through the window where they were looking at display cases with Sirius. "Are those your parents?" "Yes." Malfoy's eyes did something, a small recalibration. "Potter," he said, it wasn't a question. It was the recognition of a name he'd been given context for. "I've heard of you." "Most people have," Harry said pleasantly. "My father says you're," Malfoy paused, chose. "Important." "Your father's not wrong," Harry said without any particular warmth or coldness. "Just fact." Malfoy blinked. He'd been expecting either deference or aggression. Harry could see that. Either the nervous flattery of someone impressed by the Malfoy name or the defensive hostility of someone who'd been warned about it. What he was getting was neither, and it was clearly throwing him. "I could show you around," Malfoy said. "Hogwarts, I mean, my family's been there for 8 generations, Harry said. "I know, it's an impressive legacy." He glanced at Malfoy sidelong. "Doesn't really give you better sightlines than me, though." A pause. Malfoy turned this over. "You've studied the layout." "I've studied everything," Harry said simply. There was a moment where Draco Malfoy could have gone either way. Harry had seen the architecture of the boy's personality, and there was more in there than his father's politics, and his name's weight, more intelligence, and more genuine curiosity than the performance suggested. It just needed something to push against. "Then maybe you can tell me which professors are worth listening to," Draco said, and there was something slightly different in his voice now. Slightly more real. "Flitwick, McGonagall, Sprout, Lupin," Harry said. "In that order. Quirrell is," he paused for half a second, "complicated. Don't trust anything he says about the dark arts." Draco stared at him. "Quirrell is one of the least frightening men at the school." "Yes," Harry said. Draco opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "How do you know about—" "Clothes are done, Mr. Potter," Madame Malkin said. Harry stepped off the platform. He looked at Draco. "I'm Harry." Draco, after a beat, said, "Draco." "I know." Harry picked up his package. "Don't believe everything your father told you about blood purity. It'll make you stupider than you are, and you're not stupid." He said it with perfect friendliness, the way you'd tell someone they had something on their shirt, and went out to find his family. Draco Malfoy stood on the fitting platform and stared after him with the expression of someone who has just had their entire mental filing system knocked sideways. Ollivanders was at the end of the alley, its single golden eye watching the street with the patience of extreme age. Harry had been looking forward to this, though he'd kept that private, looking forward to it with the specific interest of someone who knew what the wand was going to do and wanted to see it happen anyway, the way you watch a film you love for the 10th time. Ollivander himself was exactly as advertised, old and pale and precise, moving through the narrow shop with the certainty of a man navigating his own mind. He looked at Harry when they came in with the pale, intent gaze that seemed to measure things the eye wasn't supposed to measure. "Harry Potter," he said softly. "I wondered when I'd see you." "I've been around," Harry said. Ollivander moved behind the counter. 11 years old. "You'll have some power coming in." His eyes drifted to Harry's forearm, his wrist. "Hold out your wand hand." Harry held out his right hand. The tape measure began its automated work. Ollivander watched it distantly, his attention somewhere else. "Your father, Holly and Mahogany, 11 inches, good for transfiguration. Your mother, Willow, 10 1/4, swishy, excellent for charms." He looked at Harry. "I wonder what you'll be." He brought the first wand. Harry took it. Ollivander watched. Nothing, second wand, third, fourth, each one producing either nothing or a small, slightly wrong-feeling flicker that made Ollivander take it back with quickening interest. By the 7th, he was looking at Harry not with frustration but with genuine, widening fascination. "Curious," he murmured. "Very curious. There's a quality to you that's." He went to a high shelf, stood on his stool, came down with a box that was dustier than the others. "Holly, 11 inches, phoenix feather." He held it out. The brother of this wand's core gave another feather, only one other, to the wand that gave you that scar. Harry took it. The gold-white lightning moved through the wand like a river finding a channel. Warm sparks scattered. The air smelled, for a fraction of a second, like speed, like movement itself, and then settled. The wand was right. It was obviously completely right, but it was also doing something slightly different in Harry's hand than it had done for the original version of him. The lightning in the wand wasn't separate from the lightning in Harry. They were talking to each other, negotiating. Ollivander was staring. Remarkable, he breathed. It fits, Harry said. It does more than fit. Ollivander looked at him over the wand. You are aware, Mr. Potter, that this wand has a brother. Yes, and you know what that means. Harry looked at the wand in his hand. It means that we'll meet eventually, he said. Him and me. He gave the wand a small, experimental flick. A stream of gold sparks scattered and hung in the air, burning bright. But I won't be using the wand when we do. Ollivander looked at him for a very long moment. No, he said quietly. I don't suppose you will. The Hogwarts Express left at 11 o'clock on September 1st, and the platform was the organized chaos it always was. Families clustered around trolleys, owls hooting, someone's cat escaping and causing a localized crisis. James and Lily stood with Harry at the edge of the platform, while Sirius manhandled his trunk onto the train with significantly more theatricality than was necessary. Right, Lily said. Every week, Harry said. More than that, James said. Every few days, Harry amended. James put a hand on his shoulder, looked at him. They were almost the same height now, not quite. Harry still had growing to do, but almost, and the look James gave him was the one he reserved for serious things, the one with no jokes behind it. Whatever's in there, whatever you find, you don't have to do it alone. I know, Harry said. I mean it. You send an owl and I'm on a broom. 5 minutes. I know, Dad. Or a flu, or a portkey. Or James, Lily said gently. James exhaled. Right. He pulled Harry into a proper hug, the kind with both arms, the kind that meant it, and Harry returned it without reservation, because why wouldn't he? The man was his father. The hug was always going to mean it. Lily was next. She held his face in both hands for a second after the hug, looking at him the way she did sometimes, the way that was reading something in him that she couldn't name but recognized. Be careful, she said. Not afraid, just careful. Always, he said. He got on the train. He found a compartment, put his things in it, and sat by the window and watched his parents on the platform as the train began to move. James had his arm around Lily. Sirius had appeared beside them and was saying something that made James laugh. Lily was watching the train, watching Harry's window, and she held his gaze until the platform curved out of sight. Harry sat back. He had 6 years of Hogwarts ahead of him. He knew most of what was coming, not everything, not the granular detail, but the shape of it. He knew about Quirrell. He knew about the chamber. He knew about the tournament. He knew about the graveyard. He settled in, and the gold-white current in him settled with him, patient and vast and warm. Time to work. The sorting was traditional and slightly nerve-wracking for everyone who wasn't Harry, who sat on the stool and put on the hat with the interested expression of a scientist conducting a familiar experiment. The sorting hat was quiet for a moment. Then in his ear it said, "Well, you're new." Not quite, Harry thought at it. You've been carrying something for a long time. A pause, several things. I see Gryffindor. Yes, obviously, there it is, plain as anything, but there's also something underneath it that I don't have a category for. Something that moves. That's the speed force, Harry told it. I've sorted 50,000 students. The hat sounded genuinely interested, which was presumably rare. I've never felt anything like you. I'm going to take that as a compliment. Where do you want to be? Harry thought about it. Genuinely, because the hat was asking genuinely. He thought about the next 6 years, about what he needed, about where the work happened. Gryffindor, the hat said like it was concluding something. Not because you're brave. You're past brave, because that's where your people are. The hat made up its mind and shouted it to the hall. Gryffindor, the table erupted. Harry took off the hat and walked to the cheering table with his hands in his pockets and a small, private smile, and sat down next to a red-haired boy he recognized immediately even though they'd never met. Ron Weasley, the boy said, hand out. Harry Potter, Harry said, and shook it. Ron's eyes widened slightly. Oh, right, yeah, obviously. He paused. My mum talks about your mum sometimes. They went to school together. I know, Harry said. She sends us a Christmas card every year. Ron relaxed visibly. You're not, I mean, you don't seem like what, Harry said. Like a, Ron waved a hand. Like a thing people make a big deal about. Harry grinned. I'm working on it. Ron laughed, and it was the easy laugh of someone who decided things quickly. And Harry decided things quickly too, and by the time the rest of the first years were sorted, they'd established a firm working alliance based on mutual appreciation of the Chudley Cannons being terrible but lovable. Hermione Granger was sorted 4 names before Harry into Gryffindor and sat down at the far end of the table with the expression of someone conducting a rapid assessment of their new environment. She had already introduced herself to 3 people by the time Harry arrived and was on her 4th. She got to Harry during the main course. "You're Harry Potter," she said, not breathlessly, as a fact. "So I've been told," Harry said. "I've read about you, well, about what happened. Which isn't really about you, per se, it's about Voldemort, but you're the relevant variable." Ron made a noise at the name. Hermione didn't notice. "The relevant variable," Harry repeated with genuine appreciation. "I've never heard it put quite like that. Does it bother you?" She was already reaching for a fork, attention split between the food and the conversation, because she was clearly someone who didn't believe in singular focus when multitasking was available. "Not even slightly," Harry said. She looked at him properly then. Something shifted in her expression, the rapid, bright assessment of someone recalibrating. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect? Someone more?" She searched for it. "Burdened. I'm working on not being," Harry said. She nodded slowly. "Then I'd like to study with you sometime, if that's all right. Not to, I don't mean anything presumptuous, I just think you probably know things that aren't in books, and I find that." She stopped herself, started again. "I think we could be useful to each other." Harry looked at her. She meant exactly what she'd said, no performance in it, no social calculation, just the honest offer of someone who wanted to learn and was willing to say so. "Tuesday evenings," Harry said, "after dinner." "I'll be in the library," Hermione smiled. It transformed her face entirely, lit it up from somewhere genuine and warm. "Tuesday evenings," she agreed and went back to her food. The first week of classes was an orientation exercise Harry had run through in his head enough times that the execution was largely administrative. He introduced himself to teachers without ceremony, asked intelligent questions without performing intelligence, and watched, as he always watched, for the texture of what was happening beneath the surface of things. Quirrell was the texture beneath the surface of things. He was teaching defense against the dark arts, which was a genuinely funny casting choice when you thought about it, because Voldemort had a fairly strong view on the dark arts, and that view was distinctly in favor of them. He was small and nervous-seeming, and wore a purple turban that smelled of garlic, which Harry knew was because Voldemort hated garlic, and the turban was where Voldemort lived, coiled around the back of Quirrell's skull like a terrible parasite. Harry sat in defense class on the 3rd day of term and watched Quirrell deliver a trembling lecture on vampire repulsion with the particular, settled attention of someone who knows exactly who they're watching. He did not let on that he knew. He asked careful, legitimate questions. He took notes. He performed with complete sincerity the role of an attentive first-year who was good at defense and interested in its theory. Because this was the truth, he was attentive, he was good at it, and the performance cost him nothing except the patience of not acting yet. The right moment would come. After class in the corridor, Ron fell into step beside him. "Quirrell is really bad at teaching," Ron said. "He's distracted," Harry said. "By what?" "Himself," Harry said, which was true in a way that Ron didn't have the context for, and accepted at face value. Hermione appeared on Harry's other side with her bag over her shoulder, and her expression already reorganized around the next class. "His curriculum is also 2 years behind current ministry defense recommendations," she said. "I checked." "You checked," Ron said. "It took 40 minutes, she said, slightly defensively. "That's impressive," Harry said. "Thank you," she said primly, and was slightly less defensive. The 3 of them walked to Transfiguration, and had, collectively, the best first lesson McGonagall had seen from a first-year cohort in a decade, which she conveyed by not expressing it at all, but by looking at them with slightly less severity than her baseline, which was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Harry found the Mirror of Erised in November. He'd been looking for the Philosopher's Stone, or rather, he'd been tracking the defenses around it, the layered magical signatures that Dumbledore and his colleagues had installed in the 3rd-floor corridor. He'd been mapping them quietly for 2 months, understanding what they were, understanding what they were protecting. The mirror was off the main path, in a classroom that had been cleared out and locked, not hidden exactly, just aside. Harry found it because he felt it before he saw it, the same way you feel a drop in temperature before you understand that the window is open. He stood in front of it. In the mirror, his parents stood behind him. His father's hand was on his shoulder. His mother was smiling. Sirius was there too, which surprised him. He hadn't expected Sirius in the deepest wish picture of himself. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about the families who stood in front of this mirror and could not walk away. He thought about what it meant that he could, not because he wanted these things less, but because he already had them. His mother was alive. His father was alive. Sirius was free. He thought about what he would have seen in the mirror in the other timeline. He reached out and touched the frame. Smooth wood, old gold paint. "I know you're there," he said quietly. From behind him, Dumbledore said, "I thought you might." Harry didn't turn around. "You used this to hide the stone. Inside it specifically. Only someone who wants the stone but not to use it can get it out." He paused. "It's a clever design." "Thank you," Dumbledore said, with the dry warmth of someone accepting a compliment he'd already given himself. He came to stand beside Harry, looking at the mirror. "What do you see?" "My family," Harry said. "Alive and together, which they are, so the mirror's showing me what I already have." He glanced at the old headmaster. "That's a good sign, I think, diagnostically." Dumbledore looked at the mirror for a moment, then back at Harry. "You came looking for the stone." "I came to understand the defenses," Harry said. "There's a difference. I'm not going to take it." He turned to face Dumbledore fully. "But Quirrell is going to try before the end of the year. He's going to work through every layer. He'll get stuck on the mirror because he'll see himself holding the stone and he won't be able to get it out." Harry met the old man's eyes. "That's when I'll be there." Dumbledore studied him. "You intend to confront queerness." "I intend to end what's in queerness," Harry said. There was a gentleness in his voice when he said it, not warmth for Voldemort, but something close to pity for Quirrell. He's not fully there anymore. What's in him has been eating him for 2 years. And you believe you can? I know I can. Not boasting, just knowing. I've been practicing. The Speed Force, when I channel it correctly, I can move through a specific kind of interference. A soul fragment that doesn't belong in a body has a different resonance than the host. I can find the boundary and push." He paused. "It's going to be unpleasant for Quirrell, but he'll survive." Dumbledore was quiet for a very long moment. The mirror stood between them, reflecting things neither of them looked at anymore. "You have told me," Dumbledore said carefully, "more in 2 months than most students tell me in 7 years. "I'm trusting you," Harry said simply, not blindly, but genuinely. He looked at the old headmaster. "I need you to trust me back. When it happens, let it happen. Don't intervene. Harry, if you come down into that corridor before it's done, Voldemort will know you're there and he'll retreat and we'll lose the opportunity and have to do this a harder way." Harry held his gaze. "Let me work." Another long silence. The mirror waited. "All right," Dumbledore said. And then, after a pause, "There is also the matter of the other Horcruxes." "I know where the locket is," Harry said. "And the ring, we should talk about those." He turned toward the door. "But not tonight. Tonight I have a transfiguration essay." He left. Dumbledore stood in front of the mirror for a moment longer. In it, something moved that wasn't his reflection. Quirrell made his move on the 14th of June, which was a warm evening with an edge of thunder on the horizon. Harry felt it the way he always felt things approaching, the specific shift in the ambient current, the slight change in pressure. He was in the common room when it started, talking Quidditch with Ron and half listening to Hermione read 3 paragraphs aloud from a charm's text. He stood up. "Harry," Hermione said. "Don't follow me," he said. Ron and Hermione looked at each other. They both opened their mouths. "I mean it," Harry said, with the particular quality of voice that they had both, over the course of 9 months, learned to recognize as non-negotiable. "Stay here, I'll be back." He was out the portrait hole before they could formulate an argument. The 3rd floor was quiet. He moved through it at walking pace. He had time, and he wanted to feel the defenses as he passed through them, wanted to know what Quirrell had already dismantled. The giant 3-headed dog, Fluffy, Hagrid's, completely asleep. Something had been played to it. He stepped over the trapdoor, dropped through. Devil's Snare. He passed through it the way light passes through a glass, the Speed Force humming just below visible threshold, a gentle warmth that the plant interpreted as sunlight and recoiled from. He dropped into the Winged Keys room, walked to the right key in 12 seconds because he could see it vibrating at a slightly different frequency than the others. The chess room already blasted through, Quirrell's work clear in the scattered pieces. The troll unconscious. The potion room. He stepped through the fire and into the last chamber. Quirrell was standing in front of the mirror. His reflection was showing him what he wanted, himself with the stone, triumphant, and the stone was resolutely not appearing in his pocket, because that was not how the mirror worked, and Voldemort apparently had not anticipated this design flaw. Quirrell turned. He went through 3 or 4 expressions in rapid sequence. Surprise, calculation, anger, and then something that was genuinely sad to see, the look of a man who had been fully consumed, where the person who had started this journey was almost entirely gone, and what was left was just a vehicle for something older and colder. "Potter," he said, and it was both of their voices layered over each other. "Hi, Professor," Harry said. "You should not be here. I keep hearing that, Harry said and walked toward the mirror. Quirrell stepped between him and it. Harry stopped 4 feet away. They stood in the firelit chamber and looked at each other. You know what I am, Voldemort said through Quirrell's mouth, the pretense already gone. The voice was the smooth, soft voice Harry remembered from the night that hadn't happened. You've always known. Yes, Harry said. Then you know you cannot stop me. I stopped you when I was 1, Harry said pleasantly. I've had 10 additional years of practice since then. Something moved in Quirrell's face, behind the eyes, a genuine, cold fury. That was a fluke, a magical accident. The remnants of your mother's charm. No, Harry said. It wasn't. He reached into himself and found the current, the great gold-white river of the speed force, and let it surface. Not violently, not as a weapon, as a truth. The lightning moved up his arms and across his shoulders in clean, warm lines, and the chamber lit with it, pale gold, almost white, like sunlight through deep water, and Quirrell flinched backward with a sound that came from Voldemort and not from Quirrell at all. What? Voldemort said. What are you? Something you don't have a category for, Harry said. He moved. Not at full speed. Quirrell was a human being with a soul being held hostage, and full speed in an enclosed stone chamber would be catastrophically imprecise. He moved at the kind of speed that felt, to Quirrell, like Harry had simply arrived beside him, one hand pressed flat against the side of Quirrell's head, and the gold-white current surging. Finding the boundary between Quirrell and Voldemort was, as he'd told Dumbledore, like finding the difference in temperature between 2 bodies of water. Quirrell was warm and frightened and diminished. What was in him was cold and alien, and wrong in a way that the Speed Force registered the way a healthy body registers infection, clearly, immediately, with a strong opinion about it. Harry pushed. Voldemort screamed. It was not a sound Quirrell's throat was designed to make. It came from underneath the physical, from the soul fragment being pried loose from its stolen anchor, and the sound filled the chamber and probably several rooms above it, and then cut off sharply as the fragment tore free. The cold rushed past Harry like a winter wind. Gone. Quirrell dropped. Harry caught him before he hit the ground, which was the velocity management application of the Speed Force that he was most glad he'd practiced. He lowered the professor carefully to the stone floor. Quirrell was breathing, barely, thin and reedy, but breathing. His face, freed of Voldemort's occupation, looked immediately and catastrophically older and more tired, the face of someone who had spent 2 years as a hotel for something that hadn't cared what it cost him. Quirrell, Harry said. No response. But the pulse under his jaw was steady. Harry straightened up. The mirror stood before him. He looked into it. His family, behind him, alive and smiling. Sirius with his arm around James's shoulder. He looked away, turned to the door, and went to get Dumbledore. The year ended quietly, as years at Hogwarts go when someone isn't put in mortal peril by the teacher, which Harry had technically managed, even if the definition required some stretching. Quirrell survived and was transferred to St. Mungo's, where he spent 4 months recovering and then, eventually, wrote a paper on parasitic dark magic that became a foundational text in its field. He never taught defense again. He found he preferred writing. Harry got on the Hogwarts Express on the 1st of July and felt the summer open up ahead of him. Ron was in the seat across from him, chocolate frog halfway to his mouth, mid-argument with Hermione about the best route to the astronomy tower. Hermione had drawn a map. Ron maintained that maps were for people without spatial awareness. Neither of them were showing signs of resolution. Outside, England rolled past in early summer green, and Harry leaned against the window and let the Speed Force settle into its resting state, the soft, constant hum of it in his chest, the background radiation of the most fundamental thing he was. He thought about the locket in a cave on the coast of Scotland. He thought about a ring in an abandoned house in Little Hangleton. He thought about the long work, the patient work, the work that didn't make a sound. He had time. He was 11 years old and he had a year's worth of Hogwarts behind him, and his parents were at King's Cross waiting for him, and the summer was long. He had all the time in the world. He just intended to use it considerably faster than anyone expected. Chapter 4. The current beneath everything. The summer between first and second year was the summer Harry destroyed 2 Horcruxes. He didn't announce it. He didn't write it in a letter, or tell Ron, or bring it up over dinner. He went with Sirius on what was officially described to James and Lily as a camping trip in the Highlands, which was the kind of cover story that works exactly as long as the people you're covering for decide to believe it. And James and Lily had both looked at Harry and then at Sirius and then at each other and said, simultaneously, "Be back by Sunday." Sirius had the bike. Harry had a location and a theory. The cave on the coast of Scotland was cold even in July, the sea hammering at the rock face with the cheerful indifference of something that had been doing this for 10,000 years, and intended to continue. Harry stood at the entrance with the wind pulling at his robes and looked at the concealed door in the rock face with the expression of a locksmith examining a familiar mechanism. "Blood to open," he said. "Yeah," Sirius said from beside him. That seems bad. It's a deterrent. The magic reads willingness, not the blood itself." Harry looked at the door. "But we don't need to open it that way. The speed force applied to stone is not the same thing as applied to air or to time. Stone has a different rhythm, slow and deep, geological, the pulse of something that has been here longer than anything alive." Harry had spent a month learning the difference, running his hands along the rock faces of the Scottish moors at 3 in the morning while his parents slept, understanding the texture of old magic, the way it bedded into physical substance over decades. He put his hand flat on the door. The speed force moved through it at the frequency of the stone itself, matched it, resonated with it, and then, very gently, outpaced it. The door's enchantments were looking for blood as a key. They weren't looking for something that moved faster than the detection mechanism could process. Harry slipped through the recognition threshold the way a hummingbird moves through a door before it closes, gone before the mechanism knew it had been there. The door swung open. "That was remarkable," Sirius said. "That was physics," Harry said, and went inside. The cave was exactly as described in Dumbledore's memories, which Harry had accessed through a pensive that Dumbledore had offered with the resigned look of a man who had stopped being surprised by what Harry asked for and started just providing it. The Black Lake, the boat, the island in the center with the stone basin, they crossed in the boat. Harry stood over the basin and looked at the locket chained to the bottom of the poisoned potion, and thought about what the potion did, the despair, the thirst, the visions, Dumbledore drinking it in the original timeline while a teenage boy watched, helpless and terrified. Harry moved at the frequency of the potion's surface tension and skimmed the locket out of the basin without displacing a single drop. "You're not going to drink it," Sirius said. "Why would I drink it?" Harry said. Dumbledore didn't have my particular set of options," Harry said, looking at the locket in his palm, heavy, old. The snake on the face of it seemed to regard him with the specific animosity of a Horcrux that recognized it was in trouble. "Come on, let's go." The Inferi came out of the lake when they were halfway back, because that was what Inferi did, and Sirius had 4 seconds of pure horror before Harry put his free hand in the water, and the speed force moved through the lake at the resonant frequency of magical animation, not the Inferi themselves, but the dark magic that was making them move. He found it and unraveled it the way you unravel a knot if you know which thread to pull first. The Inferi went still. The black water settled. "Okay," Sirius said, very quietly. "Okay, I need a minute." "Take your time," Harry said, and made for the shore. He destroyed the locket with a focused burst of speed force energy on the beach while Sirius sat on a rock, and had what he described afterward as a perfectly calm and dignified internal experience, and what his expression suggested was several private screams in sequence. The sole fragment in the locket was a small and ancient evil, well bedded into the gold, and Harry had to move at subatomic frequency to find the layer where the fragment was anchored and pull the anchor loose, but it came. It always came. Living things are designed to be whole, and even the worst of Voldemort's soul recognized, at the deepest level, that being in a locket was not where it was supposed to be. The locket broke. The fragment dispersed. Harry sat on the rock next to Sirius and looked at the sea. 2 down, he said. "How many to go?" Sirius said. 4 Horcruxes and Voldemort himself. Harry watched the waves. "The ring next, then we'll see." "The ring," Sirius said. "Dumbledore knows where it is. In a house in Little Hangleton. It's cursed. The curse is designed to move up the hand of whoever picks it up. We're going to need protective equipment." Harry glanced at him. "Do you still know that unspeakable at the Department of Mysteries?" Sirius blinked. "Marlowe, yeah, I know Marlowe. Can you get his help without telling him what it's for? I can get Marlowe's help without him remembering he gave it if I need to." "I'd prefer he remembered," Harry said. "I'd prefer everyone who helps with this to do it with full knowledge and full consent." Sirius looked at him sideways. "That's going to be harder." "Most things worth doing are," Harry said, and stood up and brushed sand off his robes. "Let's go home. Mum's probably already made dinner." Second year started in September with the traditional organized chaos and the additional variable of a flying car, which was entirely Ron's doing, and which Harry had elected not to prevent because some things were simply going to happen, and also because Ron's joy in the thing was genuine and complete, and not worth deflating for the sake of tidiness. Harry had dealt with the ring in August, a precise, quiet operation in Little Hangleton that had lasted 40 minutes and left the Gaunt house considerably less dark than it had been. The curse in the ring was Voldemort's darkest work, a killing curse variant bound directly to the stone, designed to activate on contact with living skin. Harry had moved through it at the Speed Force's threshold frequency, found the curse's mechanism, and disrupted it at the source before picking the ring up. He'd left the ring in the ruins. It was an empty vessel now, the soul fragment gone, the curse dismantled. He'd also noticed the stone set into the ring's band, the resurrection stone. He'd stood in the ruined house and turned it over in his hand and thought about what it was and what it could do and what it had done to Dumbledore in the other timeline. He'd put it in his pocket. He'd think about it later, 3 Horcruxes down. The diary already gone, obliterated by Lucius Malfoy's own machinations, in a timeline where Harry's intervention was simply to ensure more actions continue / next chapter chapter 5. The graveyard and the god Harry put his own name in the Goblet of Fire. He did it on a Thursday evening in late October, alone, after the rest of Gryffindor had gone to bed, and the entrance hall was empty except for the blue-white glow of the goblet itself and the distant sound of the castle settling into its nighttime rhythms. He walked up to it with his hands in his pockets and stood there for a moment, looking at the flame. The age line on the floor glowed gold in the goblet's light. Harry stepped over it without breaking stride. The line tried to activate. He felt the enchantment's recognition mechanism fire, trying to assess age, and he moved through the assessment window at Speed Force threshold, faster than the detection could resolve, leaving the charm behind like a gate swinging shut on empty air. He took out his folded parchment, held it over the flame. Harry James Potter, it said. Hogwarts. He dropped it in. The goblet burned blue for a single, sustained second, brighter than it had been, brighter than it probably should have been. Then it went back to its normal flame and Harry turned and walked back to Gryffindor Tower and went to sleep. And when the champions were announced the following evening and his name came out of the fire in Dumbledore's hand, he was already standing up. The hall went completely silent. Dumbledore looked at the parchment, looked at Harry. Harry Potter, he said. There was a quality in his voice that the students in the hall read as surprise, and that was, in fact, something much more specific, the recognition of a move he hadn't seen coming on a board he'd thought he understood. Harry walked to the front of the hall through absolute silence. He felt the stares, not the anxious, hunted feeling of being wrongly suspected of something, but the clean, direct awareness of a person who has chosen to be visible and is comfortable with what being visible means. He stopped beside Dumbledore. "You entered yourself," Dumbledore said, quietly enough that the words were just for Harry. "Yes," Harry said. "May I ask why?" "Because I know what happens if I'm not there," Harry said, equally quiet, "and I'd rather be there." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he gestured toward the side chamber, where Cedric Diggory and Fleur Delacour and Victor Crumb were already waiting, wearing the expressions of people who had just had a surprise added to an already complicated situation. Cedric Diggory was exactly what he'd always been, tall, decent, quietly competitive in the way of people who have genuine ability and don't need to perform it. He looked at Harry when Harry came into the chamber with the clear, unsentimental assessment of an athlete evaluating unexpected competition. "Potter," he said. "Diggory," Harry said. "For what it's worth, I'm not trying to beat you. I have a different objective." Cedric studied him. "What objective?" "Getting through this alive, all of us." Harry looked at him steadily. "Whatever the tasks are, I'll tell you what I know ahead of time. No advantage holding. If I figure something out, you know it within the hour." Cedric was quiet. "Why?" "Because we're on the same side," Harry said. "We're just the only ones who know it yet." A pause. Then Cedric held out his hand. Harry shook it. Crumb watched this exchange from across the room with the heavy-lidded attention of someone who processed things slowly and thoroughly. Fleur watched it with the precision of someone who processed things very quickly and was already 3 steps ahead. Neither of them said anything, but Harry caught Crumb's slight nod and Fleur's fractional tilt of the head and filed them both as the affirmatives they were. The champions were a team. They just hadn't been told that yet. Dumbledore found Harry in the corridor after the official proceedings, when the rest of the champions had gone back to their schools and the Great Hall was emptying. "The Triwizard Tournament," Dumbledore said carefully, "has not historically been safe," Harry said. "I know. It's also not historically been the mechanism for Voldemort's resurrection, and yet here we are." He looked at the headmaster. "The cup is a portkey. Whoever touches it at the end of the final task gets transported to a graveyard in Little Hangleton. That's where the ritual happens. Peter Pettigrew, or someone filling his role now that Peter's in Azkaban, performs the ritual. Bone of the father, flesh of the servant, blood of the enemy." Dumbledore was very still. "Blood of the enemy," he said. "My blood specifically, because of the prophecy and because of what happened at Godric's Hollow." Voldemort wants to use my blood to rebuild his body because of the protection it carries or carried. Harry paused. The ritual will work without Peter if someone else performs it. There are Death Eaters who are capable. And your plan is to go through the cup. My plan is to be the one who touches the cup, Harry said. Yes, Harry, if I'm there, I can control what happens in the graveyard. If I'm not there, someone else touches the cup and gets transported alone and dies, and Voldemort comes back anyway with a functional body and a 12-month head start on the war. Harry kept his voice level. I'd rather be there. Dumbledore looked at him for a very long time. In the years since their arrangement had begun, the honest working relationship that had replaced the chess game management Dumbledore had originally intended, the old headmaster had become significantly better at this particular silence. The silence of actually thinking rather than the silence of performing consideration. What do you need from me? He said finally. I need you to know where I'm going when I go. I need you to have the order ready to move within 30 minutes of my disappearance. Harry held his gaze. And I need you to trust that I'll handle what happens between those 2 points. And if something goes wrong, Harry smiled. It was small and genuine and completely unafraid. Something always goes wrong, he said. That's what the Speed Force is for. The first task was dragons. Harry knew which one he'd face before the draw, the Hungarian Horntail, because she was the most aggressive and the draw was not as random as the committee believed. Crouch Jr. having influenced it through means that Harry had identified and allowed to run, because changing the outcome would have required explaining how he'd noticed it, which explanation he wasn't ready to give yet. The Horntail was spectacular. She was also an animal, not a monster, not a villain, a mother protecting her nest with every legitimate reason to see Harry as a threat, and he approached her accordingly. He didn't fly the task. He didn't summon a broom. He stood at the entrance to the enclosure and felt the dragon's attention fix on him and walked into the arena at a pace that communicated, in the language of large predators everywhere, that he was not afraid and was not fleeing and was therefore not prey. The crowd was completely silent. This was not what anyone had planned for. The Horntail watched him approach. She was 40 feet of muscle and fire and ancient instinct, and Harry walked toward her with the Speed Force humming warm and steady in his chest and his hands at his sides. He stopped 8 feet from her. He was not a Parselmouth for dragonkind. The communication available to him was physical, instinctual, the body language of creatures that had been old when humans were new. He made himself small in posture while remaining open, presented no threat and no retreat, and waited. She watched him. He watched her. The golden egg was in the nest behind her, bright among the gray-brown nest eggs. Harry didn't look at it. He looked at her. 30 seconds, a minute. The crowd, which had been silent from shock, was developing the particular held-breath quality of people watching something they didn't have a framework for. Then the Horntail, very slowly, shifted 3 feet to her left. Not far, not welcoming. But 3 feet was a gap, and Harry moved through it at precisely the speed of a creature that was not threatening, not the Speed Force, just walking, careful and deliberate, and picked up the golden egg with both hands. She watched him take it. He stepped back, bowed his head, which was something he'd read in a Care of Magical Creatures text that Hagrid had written and that the Ministry had not approved. Then he walked back to the enclosure entrance. The crowd erupted. Ludo Bagman in the commentator's box said something that was drowned out by the noise. The judges' scores came up and Harry didn't look at them because the scores weren't the point. He stood outside the enclosure with the golden egg under his arm and Cedric was waiting there, having watched from the side, and Cedric said, "How did you do that?" "Patience," Harry said. "I used a transfiguration," Cedric said. "I turned a rock into a dog to distract her." He paused. "It worked, but what you did was better." "You didn't need to distract her," Harry said. "You needed to convince her you weren't a problem, and you can do that with a dragon." "You can do that with most things," Harry said, "if you're willing to take the time." He handed Cedric the golden egg to examine. Cedric turned it over in his hands with the expression of someone revising several assumptions simultaneously. The second task was the lake. Harry cracked the egg's puzzle in the bath the night after the first task, because he had the sound chamber trick, and because Hermione had annotated her copy of Magical Water Plants of the Highland Lochs with a comment about gillyweed that was half a sentence away from the solution. He told Cedric that evening. Cedric used gillyweed as well, and finished 4 minutes behind Harry, which was a creditable time for someone who hadn't had the Speed Force's spatial awareness helping him navigate 60 feet of pitch-black loch water. Harry had, incidentally, a conversation with the merpeople in the course of the task, because the merpeople were watching the hostages, and he had the Speed Force's translation-adjacent sense of meaning and intent which worked, imperfectly but functionally, across languages that were more about feeling than word. They found him peculiar. He found them interesting. They reached an understanding. He collected his hostage, a girl named Gabrielle Delacour, Fleur's sister, who clung to him with enormous eyes when he woke her, and was back on the surface in 32 minutes. He was also back with all 4 hostages, because he'd gotten there first, and the merpeople had not been inclined to prevent him from taking all of them, and he was not leaving 3 other people at the bottom of a lake to make a tournament result tidier. The judges deducted points for taking the extra hostages. Harry looked at the judges' table with a very specific expression that conveyed, without a word, that their scoring rubric was welcome to apply to someone who found it relevant. Dumbledore caught his eye from the table and appeared to be controlling a smile with considerable effort. He finished second on points. He was comfortable with that. The months between the second task and the third were the productive months, because Harry had time and proximity and access to a castle full of interesting resources, and the things he needed to do before the graveyard required preparation. He found the Room of Requirement in February. Not by accident, the way the original timeline had arranged it. He'd known it was there, knew its mechanics, knew what it would give him if he walked past it 3 times with a clear need. He needed a room in which to work without observation, and with access to the oldest magical artifacts in the castle. The room gave him an alchemist's workspace, stone benches, precise instruments, the smell of old magic and heated metal. And in the corner on a stone pedestal, the diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw, which had been lost for 1,000 years and was currently serving as the most sophisticated filing system Voldemort had ever created for a piece of his own soul. Harry stood in front of it for a long moment. The diadem was beautiful, old bronze-gilt metal set with blue stones, a line of engraving around the band in Old Norse. Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure, which was a magnificent sentiment for an object that Voldemort had made into a garbage disposal for his worst impulses. "Sorry," Harry said to the diadem generally. "This is going to feel strange." He took it off the pedestal with both hands, feeling the Horcrux's malevolence immediately, a cold, possessive pressure, the fragment of soul reaching toward him the way an infection reaches for a wound. He felt it brush the edges of his mind and rebuffed it easily, the speed force creating a barrier not of will but of sheer frequency, moving his consciousness at a rate the soul fragment couldn't track, couldn't hold, couldn't find purchase on. He dismantled it over the course of 3 evenings. The process was different each time. The locket had been anchored in the gold of its construction, the ring in the curse within its stone, the diary in the ink of 50 years of false conversation. The diadem's fragment was in the bronze itself, worked into the metalworking the way Voldemort had worked it in, carefully, microscopically, distributed through the material so that no single point was the anchor. It was his most sophisticated hiding job. It was also undone by Harry on a Tuesday at 11 p.m. while a snow squall moved over Scotland and the castle above him was asleep. He set the empty diadem back on the pedestal. It was still beautiful. It was also just a hat now, 5 of 7. The night before the third task, Harry went to Hagrid. He'd been meaning to do this for months. There were things about Hagrid that the original timeline had left incomplete, misunderstandings and misjudgments that Harry found genuinely irritating on Hagrid's behalf. He knocked on the cabin door at 8 in the evening, and Hagrid opened it with the particular expression of a man who was happy to see someone but hadn't expected them. "Harry, come in, come in." Fang collided with Harry in the doorway. Harry greeted him with both hands, which was what Fang required. Inside, the cabin was warm and slightly cluttered with the specific clutter of someone who cared deeply about magical creatures and was doing it on limited space. Harry sat at the wooden table and accepted tea in an enormous mug and looked at Hagrid with straightforward, genuine affection. "I wanted to see you before tomorrow," Harry said. Hagrid's expression did something complicated. "Nothing to worry about," he said, with the specific heartiness of someone who was worried. "You'll be brilliant." "I know," Harry said. "That's not, I wanted to see you because I wanted to." He looked at his mug. "You're important to me. I don't think I say that clearly enough." Hagrid went very still. "I mean it," Harry said. "You always have been, from the beginning." He held Hagrid's gaze. "I just wanted to make sure you knew." Hagrid made a sound that was not quite a word. He reached for a handkerchief that turned out to be a tablecloth and applied it to his face with the thoroughness of someone who was not going to acknowledge what had just happened. "Your father was the same," he said finally, thickly. "Couldn't never tell when he was buildin' up to something emotional." Harry smiled. "He'd say I get it from my mother. He'd say that and be wrong," Hagrid said and sniffed enormously. "Your mum was direct about everything. Your dad snuck up on ye Wyatt, like ye just did." Guilty, Harry said. They drank tea. Hagrid told him about the maze, the creatures inside, what had been arranged, some of which Harry knew and some of which was new detail that he filed carefully. It was a good evening. Harry left at 10, walked back to the castle under a clear sky with the stars out, and felt the eve of something quality of the night like pressure in the chest. Tomorrow, the maze, the cup, the graveyard, he was ready. The maze was a problem in 3 dimensions, and Harry moved through it like a current through water, not recklessly, not blindly, but with the complete spatial awareness that the Speed Force gave him, feeling the living walls and their magical construction, feeling the creatures within it as heat signatures and movement and intent. He helped Cedric through a blast-ended Scroot encounter in the first 20 minutes. He removed a Confundus charm from Fleur's path by finding its casting point and disrupting it at the source. He navigated the Sphinx's riddle in 40 seconds because riddles were, at their core, logic problems, and logic didn't care how old you were. He reached the cup with Cedric 40 feet behind him. He stopped. He stood in the clearing at the maze's heart and looked at the cup on its pedestal and felt, behind it, the Portkey enchantment humming with destination-specific energy. He felt Little Hangleton, 40 miles south, already in the magical topology of the connection. He felt the graveyard as a cold point on the map of where this led. Cedric arrived beside him, breathing harder than Harry, with a cut on his cheek from something in the last section of maze. He looked at the cup, then at Harry. "That's it," Cedric said. "Yes," Harry said. "You got here first. You win." "I told you," Harry said. "It's not my objective." He turned to Cedric. "I need you to listen to me carefully." Cedric looked at him. "The cup is a portkey. It's going to take whoever touches it to a graveyard. That's where Voldemort is." Harry watched Cedric's face process this. "I'm going through it because I need to be there. I need you to go back." "Go back," Cedric repeated. "Out of the maze, now, get Dumbledore. Tell him Little Hangleton. Tell him graveyard. Tell him," Harry said. 30 minutes. Harry held his gaze. "Can you do that?" Cedric stared at him. "You're going alone." "Yes." "To where Voldemort is." "Yes." A long pause. Something moved through Cedric's expression. Disbelief, assessment, the specific recalibration of someone who has been watching Harry Potter operate for 8 months and has enough data to conclude that the confidence is not performance. "If I go with you," Cedric started, "you'll be in a graveyard with Death Eaters and a resurrecting Dark Lord and no particular reason to be there," Harry said. "I need someone outside who can tell Dumbledore what happened. That's you. That's the most important job here." He meant it. He wasn't managing Cedric. He was telling him the truth. "Please." Cedric looked at him for another moment. Then he grabbed Harry's hand and gripped it once, firmly, the way his father had probably taught him, the grip of someone who has made a decision and means it. 30 minutes, Cedric said. "You'd better be standing up when we get there." "I fully intend to be," Harry said. Cedric turned and ran. Harry watched him go. Then he turned back to the cup. He reached out and touched the handle. The graveyard was cold. He landed on his feet because he'd prepared for the Portkey's rotational force and absorbed it at the knees, and was upright and oriented in less than a second, which was long enough to take in the scene. Dark, moonlit, headstones in rows. The dark bulk of the Riddle house visible on the hill above. And Wormtail, not Peter Pettigrew, who was in Azkaban, but someone who was clearly serving the same function, a thin-hunched man Harry didn't recognize who was holding a bundle of something wrapped in dark robes. Harry looked at the bundle. He felt Voldemort before he saw him, the cold, specific wrongness of a soul that had been deliberately shattered, the resonance of dark magic at the frequency of self-inflicted damage. The bundle contained what remained of Voldemort's non-body, the vapor and the malice, the thing that had been surviving in animal hosts since Quirrell's death 3 years ago. The thin man looked up, saw Harry. His expression went through surprise and then something that was almost relief, as though Harry's appearance meant the plan could proceed. "I wouldn't," Harry said. The man froze. He was holding a wand now. Harry couldn't tell where it had come from. The movement had been fast. He was pointing it at Harry. "The Dark Lord requires your blood," the man said. His voice was shaking, not with fear of Harry, with fervor. The specific, terrible trembling of someone who believed completely. "A small sacrifice for, I'll make you an offer," Harry said. He kept his voice level and his hands visible and his posture easy, the way you approach something that might spook. "Put the wand down. Walk away from this. Whatever he's promised you, it isn't real. He doesn't keep his promises, he keeps his Horcruxes, and there are 2 of those left, and when I'm done here tonight both of those will be gone and there will be nothing for you to have given yourself to." A pause. The wand didn't lower. "He will return," the man said. "Not tonight," Harry said, "and not ever if I have anything to say about it." He tilted his head. "Do you want to be on the side that wins?" The wand came up, the incantation starting, and Harry moved. At full speed, inside a graveyard, with full awareness and no need for restraint, Harry moved the way the Speed Force intended him to move. The spell discharged into empty air before the word was finished, and Harry was beside the man, the wand taken, the man sitting on the ground with the slightly stunned expression of someone who has just had their entire physical reality rearranged. He was unhurt. Harry had been specific about that. The bundle hit the ground, and Voldemort spoke. "Impressive," the voice said from the bundle on the grass. It was barely a voice, the ghost of one, the memory of Tom Riddle's smooth, cold tone, attenuated by years of formlessness, but unmistakably him. "You're faster than you were." "I've had practice," Harry said. "You should not be here," Voldemort said. This was not how this was supposed to proceed. No, Harry agreed. It wasn't. That's rather the point. He crouched down 3 feet from the bundle. The cold coming off it was physical, the cold of a thing that had rejected every warm fact about being alive, the cold of a soul that had made itself wrong. Harry felt it in the Speed Force like a stone in a river current, a disruption in the flow of something that wanted to be whole. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," Harry said. "About you." "About what you are, and what have you concluded?" The voice was very quiet. "That you're afraid," Harry said, not cruelly, honestly, "that you've always been afraid. That everything you built, the Horcruxes, the followers, the name that people were too scared to say, all of it was a wall against the one thing you couldn't face." "I do not." "Death," Harry said. "You're afraid of dying, of being forgotten, of being Tom Riddle from the orphanage who nobody came for." He held the empty dark where Voldemort was. "I understand that, I do. I watched my parents die at 1 year old. Fear of death it's honest. It's the most honest thing most people feel." Silence. "The difference," Harry said, "is what you do with it." The bundle began to move. Not the thin man, he was still sitting in the grass, staring. The bundle itself was unwrapping, the dark robes falling away, and what was beneath them was a thing that had no business being in a body, formless, pulsing, the concentrated remnant of a will that had survived decades without flesh through sheer refusal to accept its own end. It was horrible. It was also, Harry thought, deeply sad. "You can't stop the ritual," Voldemort said. His presence was expanding, the non-body asserting itself in the physical space of the graveyard. "The steps have already been taken. Bone of the Father, around them something moved in the earth of the Riddle grave. The servant's part is already done." He paused. "And you are here, your blood is here." "My blood isn't going to do what you think," Harry said. "Your blood carries the protection your mother." "My mother is alive," Harry said. Silence, complete silence. "Her protection isn't a magical residue in my blood," Harry said. "It's her. It's a living enchantment, renewed every time she chooses it, and it doesn't just belong to me." He stood up. "You made a mistake 4 years ago in Godric's Hollow. You made a second one 3 years ago with Quirrell. And you're making a third one right now by assuming I came here without a plan." The cold intensified. Around the graveyard, Harry felt the approaching presences, Death Eaters, summoned by the Dark Mark, apparating into the darkness beyond the headstones. He heard them arriving. He didn't look. He was looking at Voldemort. "There are 2 Horcruxes left," Harry said. "The cup in your vault at Gringotts and Nagini." He felt rather than saw Voldemort's reaction to this, the cold spike of fury, the desperate calculation. "The cup I can get tonight. Gringotts will take a bit of paperwork." "Nagini," he paused. "Where is she?" "You think I'll tell you. She's here," Harry said. He'd felt it in the last 30 seconds, the massive reptilian presence beyond the headstones, the distinctive living warmth of an enormous snake moving through cold grass. He turned his head, said in Parseltongue, "Nagini," movement in the dark. The Death Eaters at the perimeter of the graveyard shifted. Someone cast a lumos. The light caught the enormous snake moving through the headstones toward Harry, and the Death Eaters scattered from her path like water from a stone. Nagini was 15 feet of muscle and malice, and she came to Harry and stopped. She looked at him with the flat, assessing intelligence of a creature that was more than it appeared to be, the Horcrux inside her lending a quality to her gaze that was deeply unnatural. "He calls to you," Harry said in Parseltongue. "Yes," she said. "Does he ask or command?" A pause. "Commands." "And before him? What were you before him?" Longer pause. "Free." Harry crouched to her level. He was aware of Voldemort behind him, of the Death Eaters around him, of the 30-odd wizards in this graveyard, who were all in various states of uncertainty about what they were watching. He was aware of all of it, and it wasn't the priority. "You don't have to be his," he said. "What he put in me," Nagini said slowly, "it does not leave." "I know," Harry said. "I can take it out." She regarded him. He met her flat, inhuman gaze with the steadiness he'd been practicing since he was 1 year old. The cold from Voldemort was pressing at his back. The Death Eaters were starting to move, starting to react, someone shouting something that was a command, someone else raising a wand. Harry put his hand on Nagini's head. "This will hurt," he said. "Do it," she said. The Speed Force moved through Nagini like sunlight through water, warm and clean, and absolutely certain of where it was going. The Horcrux fragment was deep, worked into her fundamental nature over the years Voldemort had been carrying her, using her, feeding her, and weaponizing her in equal measure. Harry found the boundary, the place where Nagini ended and Voldemort began. He pulled. Nagini screamed, a sound a snake isn't supposed to make, the sound of something fundamental being separated from something that had grown around it. Voldemort screamed at the same time, the thin, terrible voice rising, the non-body shuddering as another anchor was severed. The Death Eaters were shouting and spells were flying, and Harry had his hand on Nagini's head and his eyes closed, and he was running the Speed Force through the darkest and oldest of Voldemort's creations with everything he had. The fragment tore, it dispersed. Nagini went limp under his hand. Not dead, breathing, heart steady, her presence in the Speed Force suddenly and completely clean for the first time in decades. Harry held her head for a moment. "How do you feel?" he said. She was quiet for a long time. "Empty," she said. "But mine, good," he said. He stood up. The Death Eaters had surrounded him, 30 of them in a loose circle, wands pointed, illuminated by a dozen Lumos charms. They were the most feared witches and wizards of the last generation, veterans of a war that had broken the world once already, and they were standing in a ring around a 14-year-old boy in a graveyard. Harry looked around the circle. The gold-white lightning moved across his shoulders. It wasn't a display. He wasn't performing it for effect. It was simply what happened when the Speed Force was at full presence and he stopped managing its visibility. The light it cast was warm and clean and moved over the headstones with the quality of early morning sunlight. "I want to be clear," Harry said to the ring of Death Eaters, "about what's happened tonight. Your master had 7 anchors preventing his death. 6 of them are gone. The last one," he looked at the dark air where Voldemort's non-body had been and found it diminished, smaller, the cold of it no longer expanding but contracting. The ritual was unraveling because its components were wrong, the bone without the blood, the servant partial, the magic incomplete. "The last one is him, the body of him, whatever's left. Kill him," Voldemort said. The voice was thinner now, more distant. Nobody moved. Harry looked at the nearest Death Eater, Lucius Malfoy, who he recognized from years of Draco-adjacent observation, pale and precise and now very still with his wand up and his expression doing something complicated behind the mask. "You've been fighting for a man who was already losing," Harry said to Malfoy. "Tonight he had everything he needed for a comeback and it didn't work. So I'd like you to think carefully right now about what you're actually fighting for, because it isn't him anymore. It's just the idea of him, and ideas don't keep you out of Azkaban." Malfoy's wand lowered 3 inches, not a surrender, a hesitation. But 3 inches in a graveyard at this specific moment meant something. Then the crack of apparitions started at the edges of the graveyard, and the order arrived. Dumbledore came with Moody and Shacklebolt and a dozen others, and the graveyard became a battlefield that was also, at its core, a dissolution, not a war but an ending, the Death Eaters apparating away in 1s and 2s, the ones who didn't fast enough being bound and restrained, the ritual space unmade by the arrival of people who knew what they were doing and had been waiting, taut and ready, for 30 minutes. Harry stood in the center of it with the Speed Force settled back to its resting hum and watched it resolve. Voldemort was gone. The non-body had retreated, fled in the way a formless thing flees, which was less running and more unraveling, the dissolution of something that no longer had enough anchor to maintain coherent presence. Not dead, not yet, but reduced to something so diminished that the concept of threat was now genuinely comic. 1 Horcrux left, the cup in Gringotts. Harry had ideas about the cup. Dumbledore found him among the headstones. The old headmaster looked at him with an expression that was profoundly human in a way he didn't often show. Unguarded, the performance of serenity fully dropped. He looked like what he was, an old man who had lived too long with too many plans and had just watched something he hadn't planned happen and had it be better than anything he'd arranged. "Are you hurt?" Dumbledore said. "Number Nagini, she's fine, she's in the grass over there." Harry pointed. "She needs some time, she had something taken out of her." Dumbledore looked at him. "Harry, I know, 6 Horcruxes." Dumbledore's voice was very quiet. "In 4 years. 5, actually," Harry said. "The diary was already gone before I started." He looked at the old headmaster. "There's 1 left, the cup. When this is sorted here, I need the Ministry to authorize Gringotts access. Specifically vault number 713. Dumbledore blinked. That is Bellatrix Lestrange's vault." "Yes, the Ministry will not. The Ministry," Harry said, "is about to have a graveyard full of bound Death Eaters to process. I think they'll find themselves in a conciliatory mood." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "I'll handle the ministry. Can you handle Gringotts?" Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and then he laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised out of him, warm and genuine and completely uncontrolled, and it transformed his face into something that was briefly, startlingly young. "I believe," Dumbledore said, "that between the two of us we can manage it." Harry looked around the graveyard. At the headstones, the departing Order members, the shapes of bound Death Eaters, the dark bulk of the Riddle House on the hill. The thin man who had tried to perform the ritual was sitting on the grass with his head in his hands. "Professor," Harry said. "Yes, thank you for coming." Dumbledore looked at him. "Thank you," he said with genuine weight, "for being here." Above them, the stars were out. The night was cold and clear. Somewhere in the grass beyond the headstones, Nagini moved through the dark, slow and quiet and free for the first time in 30 years, heading somewhere she'd chosen herself. Harry watched her go. Then he turned and walked toward the light. Chapter 6. The speed of love. The ministry moved like the ministry always moved, in the direction of whoever was applying the most pressure, at whatever speed made them look like they'd chosen it themselves. Harry applied pressure. He did it the way he did most things, precisely, without announcing it, with the patience of someone who understood that institutions don't change because you're right. They change because the cost of not changing becomes higher than the cost of changing. He sat in the corridor outside Cornelius Fudge's office on a Tuesday morning in early November, 2 weeks after the graveyard, in his school robes with his Hogwarts bag at his feet and his hands folded in his lap, and waited. He'd been waiting for 40 minutes. The secretary, a small, nervous woman named Iris, had told him 3 times that the minister was busy. Harry had said 3 times that he understood and would wait. He said it with perfect pleasantness, without impatience or irritation, and the pleasantness somehow made it worse than irritation would have been. At 43 minutes, Fudge opened his door. He was a round-faced man in a lime-green bowler hat, with the specific expression of someone who had been expecting confrontation and had prepared a speech for it, and was now finding the absence of confrontation more disconcerting than the confrontation would have been. "Mr. Potter," he said. "Minister," Harry said and stood. "Thank you for seeing me." "I didn't," Fudge started, and then stopped, because technically he had opened the door, which was a form of seeing. "Come in," he said, with the resignation of a man who has identified that he has already lost this exchange and is simply managing the terms of it. The office was decorated with the specific confident clutter of a man who had been in power long enough to stop noticing his own taste. Magical portraits, a case of awards, a window overlooking the atrium where the fountain Fudge was particularly proud of burbled away in gold. Harry sat, didn't wait for an invitation. "I need authorization for Gringotts access," Harry said. "Vault 713, Bellatrix Lestrange." Fudge stared at him. That is a private citizen's vault. "The ministry cannot simply..." "Bellatrix Lestrange is a Death Eater currently awaiting trial for the Longbottom incident," Harry said. "Her vault is likely to contain dark artifacts. The relevant legislation, or Act, Section 42, Subclause 9, allows ministry authorization of vault access when there's reasonable cause to believe it contains materials relevant to active criminal investigation." He looked at Fudge steadily. "The investigation into Voldemort's activities qualifies." Fudge flinched at the name. "Now, there's no need to. We don't know that you know who is actually. There were 32 Death Eaters in a graveyard in Little Hangleton 2 weeks ago," Harry said. 14 of them are in ministry custody. 3 of them have already given statements." He paused. "I was there. I gave a statement. Dumbledore was there. He gave a statement. The Daily Prophet has it on the front page this morning, though I understand you haven't released an official response yet." Fudge's face had gone through several colors. It was currently somewhere in the pink-beige range. "The thing is," Harry said, his voice remaining perfectly level and reasonable, "I'm going to get into that vault. I can do it the slow way, through the courts, which will take 6 months and generate considerable public attention about why the ministry was obstructing the investigation, or I can do it the fast way, which requires your signature on a standard access form and takes about 30 seconds. He tilted his head slightly. "I'd prefer the fast way." "I think you would too." A long silence. "You're 14 years old," Fudge said. "I'm aware," Harry said. This is highly irregular. Most things worth doing are," Harry said. Fudge looked at him. Harry looked back. Neither of them blinked. Fudge reached for his quill. Gringotts on a Thursday morning had the quality of a very old institution that had absolutely no opinion about your urgency. The goblins behind the counter processed their cue with the unhurried efficiency of beings who had been banking for longer than any human civilization had been writing things down, and who found human impatience both predictable and irrelevant. Harry went to the main desk and asked for Ragnarok. The goblin behind the counter, young relatively, with the sharp-edged attention of someone new enough to the job to still find things interesting, looked at him, looked at the ministry authorization, looked back at Harry. Ragnarok, Harry repeated. Ragnarok is the director, the goblin said. I know, Harry said. Another look, the goblin disappeared. Returned in 4 minutes with an expression that conveyed, without words, that Ragnarok had agreed to this meeting under protest, and that Harry should consider what this said about his situation. Ragnarok's office was deep in the bank, past the main hall, past the vault's corridor, into a part of Gringotts that most humans never saw, where the architecture went from grand marble to something older and more honest, dark stone and torchlight and the distant sound of dragons. The office itself was large and spare and functional, a desk covered in ledgers, a fireplace that burned green, walls that were entirely books. Ragnarok was old. Not old the way Dumbledore was old. Dumbledore's age was in his face and his history. Ragnarok's age was in the quality of his stillness, the way very old things are still. He was sitting behind his desk when Harry came in, and he looked at Harry with the flat, measuring intelligence of someone who had spent centuries deciding what things were worth. Harry Potter, he said. Director Ragnarok, Harry said. He sat down without being invited, because being invited would have taken another 15 minutes, and he was genuinely interested in getting to the point. Thank you for seeing me. I don't receive many requests for Ragnarok specifically, the goblin said. Usually the ministry sends people to junior staff. They consider us interchangeable. His voice was neutral in the way that contained whether. That's their mistake, Harry said. I'm not the ministry. No, Ragnarok said, looking at him with attention. You're not. You have their authorization, but you're not them. He leaned back. What do you actually want, Mr. Potter, beyond the vault? Harry considered him. I want to talk about what happens after the vault. Ragnarok's eyes sharpened. After. Voldemort is effectively finished. His Horcruxes are gone or will be after today. His body is destroyed. His Death Eaters are scattered or in custody. The war everyone's been waiting for is not going to happen, or not the way anyone planned. Harry leaned forward. What comes after that is a reconstruction, a world that has to decide what it's going to be. And part of what it needs to decide is what its relationship with Gringotts, with goblin banking, goblin magic, goblin culture is going to be. Ragnarok was very still. The current arrangement, Harry said, is wrong. The history of it is wrong. I'm not the person with the authority to fix it, and I won't pretend I am. But I'm the person who's going to have a significant amount of influence over what the wizarding world does in the next 10 years, and I want to use some of that influence on this. He held the goblin's gaze. I'd like to start a conversation, a real one, not diplomacy. An actual conversation about what Gringotts wants and what it's been denied and what we could build instead. The fire crackled. Ragnarok looked at Harry for a very long time. You're 14, he said finally. That keeps coming up, Harry said. I find it's most relevant to people who don't want to engage with what I'm actually saying. Ragnarok made a sound that might, in certain interpretations, have been a laugh. The vault, he said. We'll get you into the vault. And then he looked at Harry. We'll have our conversation. Thank you, Harry said. Don't thank me yet, Ragnarok said. I have a great deal to say, and none of it is simple. I'm not in a hurry, Harry said. Ragnarok looked at him with something that was, if not warmth, adjacent to respect, the particular regard that very old things have for other things that understand time. No, he said. I don't suppose you are. The cup was in a chamber so deep in the vault that the enchantments on it registered as their own local weather system, cold and pressing, and specifically designed to induce a creeping, irrational despair in anyone who came near it. The goblin escort stopped at the vault entrance and watched Harry go in alone. He found it on the third shelf, buried under a stack of dark artifacts that had been multiplying in the Gemino curse's grip for years, copies of cursed objects that rattled against each other in silver and bronze and gold. He felt the cup before he saw it, the Horcrux energy unmistakable now, after 5 previous encounters, like recognizing a voice in a noisy room, the same cold wrongness, the same desperate anchor hunger. He picked it up with both hands and felt the fragment reach toward him. One more, he said quietly to nothing in particular, then you're all done. He dismantled it standing in Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, surrounded by multiplying dark artifacts, with a goblin watching from the doorway with an expression of absolute inscrutability. The process took 11 minutes. The cup hit the floor when it was empty and rang against the stone and lay still. Harry set it upright, walked out of the vault. 6 of 6. He walked back through the bank with his hands in his pockets and the speed force singing warm in his chest, and thought about Voldemort, what remained of him, the formless non-thing drifting in the forests of Albania, stripped of every anchor, every failsafe, every insurance policy he'd spent 50 years building. Alone with his own soul, which was the thing he'd spent 50 years running from, dying now, really dying without anything to stop it. Harry thought about Tom Riddle in the orphanage and felt something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite grief, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. Then he stepped out of Gringotts into Diagon Alley, and the morning hit him, cold November air, the smell of bread from the bakery 2 doors down, someone's owl overhead carrying post, the ordinary, wonderful, mundane reality of the world going about its business, and he stood on the steps for a moment with his eyes closed and let it land. 6 Horcruxes. Voldemort dying in a forest somewhere, too diminished to do anything about it, too reduced to be anyone's threat anymore. 14 Death Eaters in Ministry custody, Sirius free, Peter in Azkaban, Remus teaching, his mum alive, his dad alive, breakfast waiting at home. He opened his eyes. He went to find Hermione and Ron. They were in Flourish and Blots, of course they were, because Hermione had a shortlist and Ron had been dragged along with the resigned cheerfulness of a man who had learned that being dragged to bookshops by Hermione was actually fine if you made her buy you something from the sweet shop after. Harry found them in the back of the shop near the Advanced Charms section, Hermione holding 2 books and reading the back of a third, Ron sitting on the floor with a Quidditch almanac open across his knees because he discovered you could do this in bookshops if nobody was paying attention. He stood in the aisle and looked at them for a moment before they noticed him. This was something he'd been doing more often lately, finding moments to just look, to be present in the specific fact of things being as they were. Hermione, lip between her teeth, comparing the indexes of 2 books with the focused intensity she brought to everything she cared about. Ron, lips moving slightly as he read the canon's seasonal statistics with the devoted attention of a man whose optimism had survived a great deal of evidence to the contrary. Well, Hermione said without looking up. Done, Harry said. She looked up. Ron's head came up from the almanac. Done, Hermione said. The cup, it's done. He looked at them both. 6 of 6. The shop was quiet around them. Someone was browsing Historical Transfiguration 3 aisles over. A small enchanted bookmark was flying in circles near the ceiling. Ron said, so that's all of them, and he's just dying, Harry said, somewhere in Albania, without a body or an anchor or anything to stop it. He paused. It'll take a few weeks, maybe a month, but yes. Another silence. Then Hermione put both books down, walked across the aisle and hugged him, not the formal sort, the real sort, both arms, the kind that meant something. Harry returned it because it meant something to him too, because these 2 people had been alongside him for 3 years, and had done it with no speed force, and no borrowed future memory, and no cosmic inheritance. Just the straightforward courage of 2 people who had decided that being Harry Potter's friend was worth the complicated implications, and that commitment had never once wavered. Ron got up from the floor. He stood there for a moment, Quidditch almanac still in hand, and then he did what Ron always did when he was moved by something. He became very matter-of-fact about it. Right, Ron said. We're getting ice cream. It's November, Hermione said, releasing Harry. I know when it is, Ron said. It's ice cream weather. That's not a thing. Every weather is ice cream weather, Ron said, with the authority of someone who had grown up in a house that treated pudding as a food group. Harry, ice cream. Yes or number? Absolutely yes, Harry said. They left the bookshop. Hermione bought both books and the third one on the way out, because she'd been reading it the whole conversation and had reached a conclusion. The alley was busy with late morning shoppers and the particular November light that made everything look slightly gold. They went to Florian Fortescue's, which was operating on a reduced seasonal schedule, but had not, emphatically, closed, and they sat outside at the iron tables with their coats on and ate ice cream in November, because Ron Weasley had decreed it, and the universe had no standing objection. Harry ate his chocolate and looked at Diagon Alley going about its business and felt the particular quality of a day that was both ordinary and entirely not. What happens now? Ron said. To what? Harry said. Ron waved his spoon. To everything, to the wizarding world, to you, to all of it. Harry considered. Voldemort's gone in a month. His Death Eaters are in custody or scattered. The Ministry is going to spend 6 months being very loud about things and then settle into something slightly better than before, because the pressure's on and Dumbledore's paying attention, and some of the people who have been waiting to fix things will finally have room to do it. He looked at Ron. The Horcruxes are gone. The war isn't going to happen. And you, Hermione said. She was watching him with her particular quality of attention, the one that was reading several things at once and was gentle about what it found. Harry thought about it. Actually thought, because the question deserved a real answer and she'd asked it like she wanted one. "I'm going home for Christmas," he said, "and then I'm finishing school. And then I'd like to do something about the goblin rights situation, which is genuinely disgraceful, and nobody's treating it seriously. And Remus needs the Wolfsbane potion access legislation sorted, which I've been drafting a proposal for since third year." He paused. "And I'd like to sleep for a week at some point." Hermione laughed. It was the real one, unguarded and warm. "In that order." "Probably not in that order," Harry admitted. Ron pointed at him with his spoon. "The sleeping first." "The sleeping first," Harry agreed. The letter arrived at Hogwarts on a Thursday evening in late November, addressed to Harry in his mother's handwriting, which was small and precise and slightly impatient-looking even at rest. He opened it in the common room with Ron and Hermione on either side, pretending to do homework. "Harry, Dumbledore flewed this morning. I've been told, in the specific way Albus tells you things that he wants you to believe he's revealing casually, that the creature in Albania died 4 days ago. He used the word dissolved. I'm choosing to believe that's accurate and not to ask follow-up questions about what dissolved means for a partially formed non-corporeal entity. Your father is in the garden pretending to denome the flower beds. He's been out there for 40 minutes. There are no gnomes. He just needed somewhere to stand. Sirius is here. He showed up an hour ago with champagne and the expression of a man who has been carrying something for 13 years and has just been told he can set it down. He's currently in the kitchen talking to himself quietly. I've elected not to interrupt. I have been in my lab since I heard. Not because I'm upset, I want to be clear about that. Because I needed to think in the specific way I think in the lab, with my hands doing something. And what I've been thinking is this. You have been carrying this since you were 1 year old. The weight of what you knew and what you were doing and what it cost. You have been doing it quietly and completely and without complaint for 14 years, and I have been watching you do it and trying not to be frightened by it and mostly succeeding. I want you to know, I need you to know that I have seen it, all of it. Not just the outcomes, not just the results, but the choosing of it. The daily, constant, deliberate choosing to carry the thing you were given and to carry it towards something instead of away from something. Come home for Christmas. No, come home now if you want. You don't have to wait for Christmas. The school will survive without you for a weekend. McGonagall will complain and then she'll arrange the flu access because McGonagall always arranges it when she's complained enough. We have a lot to talk about. But mostly I just want you here. Mum P.S. Your father says to tell you he'll make pancakes. He says specifically to tell you that. I don't know what this is code for, but apparently you will. Harry sat with the letter for a moment. Ron was very carefully not reading over his shoulder. Hermione had also gone very still in the way of someone exercising considerable restraint. "All right," Ron said. "Yes," Harry said. "Good news." "Yes," Harry said. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his robes, and then he sat back in the common room chair and looked at the fire for a moment. Gryffindor Tower was warm and busy around him. Third years playing Exploding Snap, someone's astronomy essay in progress on the table, Fred and George Weasley executing something complicated in the corner that would probably result in a formal inquiry. He had been in this castle since September. He had a defense essay due Friday, a charms practical next week, an ongoing conversation with Ragnarok that was evolving into something that might actually change things, and a first draft of the Wolfsbane legislation that needed Remus's eyes on it before he'd feel confident sending it anywhere. He had a lot to do. He went to McGonagall's office. McGonagall did complain. She complained specifically, pointedly, and with considerable rhetorical skill about the impropriety of students departing for home during term time for reasons other than medical emergency or family bereavement, and the poor precedent set by making exceptions for individual students regardless of their circumstances, and the logistical inconvenience of arranging flu access on short notice. She arranged the flu access while complaining. She had it sorted before the complaint was finished. Harry stood at her office fireplace with his bag on his shoulder and looked at his head of house with genuine warmth. "Thank you, Professor." McGonagall looked at him over her glasses. She had a specific expression she reserved for Harry. He'd noticed it in first year and catalogued it and never quite been able to name it. It wasn't the exasperation she showed most students or the formal approval she showed exceptional ones. It was something in between or something else entirely, the look of a woman who had been teaching for 40 years and had learned to recognize, without sentimentality, when something was worth the attention. "Come back on Sunday," she said, "on time." "With the defense essay, I'll have it done by Saturday," Harry said. "Of course you will," she said, which was not a compliment so much as a statement of resigned fact. She gestured at the fireplace. "Go home, Potter." He stepped into the fire, the green caught around him. And then Hogwarts was gone and the world spun and opened into the familiar stone hearth of the cottage in the Highlands, and he stepped out into the sitting room, which smelled of wood smoke and his mother's cooking, and something serious had spilled that hadn't quite been fully cleaned up. James was in the doorway from the garden, still in his coat. He looked at Harry the way he'd been looking at Harry since Harry was 1 year old, and standing in a cot making strategic gestures, with the full, direct, unguarded attention of a man who loved his kid and wasn't planning to be subtle about it. His eyes were doing the thing where they were slightly too bright, and he was compensating by pretending they weren't. "Hey," James said. "Hi, Dad," Harry said. James crossed the room and hugged him, and it was the same hug it had always been, both arms, no reservation, the hug of someone for whom physical affection was a native language rather than a second one. Harry returned it with the same completeness. "Pancakes," James said, into the space above Harry's shoulder. "Yeah," Harry said, full spread. "Blueberries everything. Sounds good," James pulled back. Looked at his son's face with the close, careful attention of a parent checking the actual condition of their child under the reported condition. Harry let him look. There was nothing to hide, which was the simplest possible version of a complicated truth. "You're okay?" James said. "Yes," Harry said. "I'm actually yes," James nodded. Something in him settled, the last tension of the last month, Harry thought, the held breath quality that had been in his father's voice and posture since the graveyard, resolving into something more like the ordinary. "Good," he said. "Good." He cleared his throat. "Right, I'm making pancakes. Sit down." "I don't need to sit down." "Sit down," James said, already heading for the kitchen, because apparently the solution to every complicated feeling in the Potter household was to immediately do something with your hands. Harry sat. Sirius emerged from wherever he'd been, the back garden, it turned out, where he'd apparently been sitting on the stone wall looking at the moors in the company of a bottle he'd been treating as a companion rather than a beverage. He came in through the kitchen door with his coat collar up and his hair doing what Sirius's hair did in wind, which was whatever it wanted, and saw Harry at the table and stopped. "Hey, kid," he said. "Hey, Sirius," Harry said. Sirius sat down across from him. The bottle was not a casualty. He'd left it outside, which was a decision Harry chose to read as a positive sign. He looked at Harry with the specific look Sirius had, which was direct in a way that was different from James's directness. James's directness came from openness. Sirius's came from a life that had taught him that sentiment was expensive and should therefore be spent honestly. "Dumbledore told you," Harry said. "Your mum told me," Sirius said. "Dumbledore told your mum. Right." "It's over," Sirius said. Not a question, not disbelief. Just the flat fact of it, said out loud, with the specific quality of a man testing whether the words felt as real as they should. "It's over," Harry said. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then, "I need to say something." "All right. I've been for 14 years I've known," he stopped, started again. "You were 1 year old, and you were carrying it, all of it. The memory of that night and the knowledge and the plan and all of it, and you were one Harry and nobody. None of us knew, not really, not the full weight of it, and you just—" He stopped again. His jaw was tight. "I'm sorry," he said. "That's what I'm trying to get to. I'm sorry you had to carry it alone for as long as you did." Harry looked at his godfather. "I wasn't alone," he said. "You were, at the beginning." "At the beginning I was one," Harry said. "By the time I was 5, Mum knew most of it. By the time I was 8, you knew some of it. By the time I got to school, I had Hermione and Ron." He held Sirius's gaze. "I was never as alone as it could have been, and the parts I was alone in," he paused. "I had the Speed Force. It's not nothing, having the whole momentum of creation at your back." Sirius stared at him. "How," he said, "are you this reasonable about all of it?" "I've had 14 years to practice," Harry said. "You're also 14. That keeps coming up." Sirius laughed, the real one, the full one, the laugh that was serious at his actual self rather than the performance of it. It lit his whole face, made him look younger by a decade, made the tight lines around his eyes disappear for the duration. Harry watched it happen with the straightforward pleasure of someone who knew exactly what that laugh had cost and what it meant that it was still available. James appeared in the doorway with a stack of pancakes on a plate. "Are we doing feelings?" he said. "We're done with feelings," Sirius said, composing himself. "We were doing feelings beautifully," Harry said. "We were not." Sirius was about to cry, Harry told his father. "I was not about to cry, I was about to." He was about to cry, James confirmed, setting the pancakes down. "I could see it from the kitchen. It had cry written all over it." "I hate both of you," Sirius said, with enormous affection and reached for a pancake. Lily came in from the lab at 7, still in her work robes, with ink on her left hand that she'd missed, and the focused but transitioning expression of someone coming back from a long way inside their own thinking. She saw Harry at the table, and she went still for half a second. Then she crossed the kitchen and held his face in both hands, the way she had on every platform and every holiday, and she looked at him with the full weight of her particular attention, the attention that had always been able to find the thing he was actually carrying under the thing he was showing. "Hi, Mum," Harry said. "Hi, baby," she said. "I'm not a baby." "You're my baby," she said, in the tone that dismissed this objection from consideration entirely. She released his face, sat down next to him. Looked at the remains of the pancake situation. "Did you eat?" "Substantially," Harry said. "Good." She looked at him again. The directness of it, the fullness of it, the attention that had been watching him for 14 years and had never once looked away because it was difficult. "It's done. It's done," Harry said. She nodded, slowly, like she was letting it arrive at its proper depth rather than just skimming the surface of it. He watched her do it, the way she processed things, the precision of it, the refusal to perform a reaction before she'd actually had one. Then she said, "The piece that was in you." He knew what she was asking. "Gone," he said. "Since Quirrell, I felt it go." She exhaled. "Just once, just a breath, but everything in it." "I would have told you sooner," Harry said. "But I didn't want you to think about it as a problem that needed solving. It was already being solved." "I know," she said. "I knew I understood why you." She stopped. "I just want you to know that I thought about it. I thought about it every day since you told me, not with fear, just present, knowing it was there and that you were handling it and that I trusted you to handle it." "I know," Harry said. "And I want you to know," she said, "that in any other version of events, in any world where things had gone differently, I would have done anything to remove it from you. If it had meant—" She stopped again. Her jaw was set in the way of someone exercising complete control over something. "If it had meant—" "I know," Harry said quietly. "I know what you would have done." She looked at him. "You knew from the beginning, everything about that night, what it cost." "Yes, and you were one." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I have a theory about the Speed Force." Harry raised an eyebrow. "I've been developing it for 11 years, she said, with the slightly defensive tone of someone who is aware that 11 years is a long time to develop a theory and has opinions about that. "I think it's not separate from magic. I think it's underneath it, the foundation of it. The thing that magic runs on top of, the current that makes everything possible." She looked at him. "I think you're not a wizard who also has the Speed Force. I think you're the Speed Force and you're also a wizard." Harry looked at his mother. He thought about the current in his chest, warm and vast and patient. He thought about running backward through a burning night at 1 year old, following the current home. He thought about the graveyard, gold-white lightning in a ring of dark-robed wizards, the feeling not of power but of rightness, of fundamental alignment, of being exactly what he was supposed to be. "Yeah," he said, "I think you might be right." She nodded, satisfied in the way of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed. Then she stole a pancake from the plate and poured herself tea and sat next to her son in the warm kitchen while James and Sirius argued about something in the sitting room that was probably Quidditch, and the Highland wind moved outside, and the cottage held them all in its usual easy warmth. He went out to the moors before bed, not running, just walking, at human pace, through the frost-tipped heather under a clear sky. The stars were out in force, the way they were in the Highlands, where there was nothing between you and them but cold air. He could name most of them. Lily had taught him the Muggle names and James had taught him the wizarding names, and they were the same stars with 2 different histories, which seemed appropriate. He walked to the stone wall at the edge of the property and sat on it, the cold of it working through his robes in the way cold does when you've stopped moving, and he looked at the moors going dark and heathered into the middle distance. The Speed Force was a hum in his chest. Not the active roar of the graveyard, not the working current of a Horcrux being dismantled, just the steady background warmth of it, the resting state, the sound of a river in its bed on a quiet day. He had been hearing it for 14 years. He had never once found it anything but exactly itself, vast and patient and entirely without agenda, the universe's motion simply present in him, the way being alive is present in you. He thought about what came next. Not in the strategic sense, the Wolfsbane legislation, the Goblin rights conversations, the general reconstruction of a wizarding world that needed to remember how to exist without the shape of a war to organize itself around. That was real and ongoing, and he had plans for most of it, but underneath that, what came next for him? He was 14, he had 3 years of Hogwarts left. He had parents and a godfather, and 2 people who had chosen to be his friends without fully understanding what that entailed and had never regretted it. He had a conversation with Ragnarok that was becoming something important. He had Remus teaching defense and not leaving at the end of the year because he had a contract, and the students liked him, and Harry had made certain, very quietly, that the relevant ministry committee received an accurate account of Remus Lupin's teaching record and an inaccurate account of how many students were aware of his condition, which was 0%, because Harry had said so, and people tended to believe Harry. He had time, real time. Not the haunted borrowed time of the other timeline, not the racing desperate time of dismantling Horcruxes, but actual ordinary time, the kind you could spend however you wanted, the kind that stretched ahead without a specific catastrophe at the end of it. He thought about what he wanted to do with it. The honest answer was that he wanted to run. Not toward anything, not away from anything, just the pure kinetic joy of it, the thing that had been his first and most fundamental pleasure since before he could speak, moving through the world at the speed of the thing that made him most himself, the heather flattening, the frost scattering. The gold-white lightning drawing lines on the dark moor that faded in seconds and left no mark, because that was how the Speed Force worked. It moved and it was gone. It left the world unchanged. It was the motion itself and not the destination. He stood up from the wall. He ran, full out, flat out, the Speed Force rising from its resting warmth into something fully awake and fully itself, the gold-white lightning crackling up his arms and off his heels into the dark November air. He ran the moors the way he'd been running them since he was 5, in big sweeping arcs, the heather a continuous blur, the stars above him doing their slow, long rotation and him doing his fast, short one, round and round the familiar landscape with the cold wind in his face, and the universe moving through him the way it always had. He ran until the thinking stopped and there was only the running. Then he slowed, stopped. Stood in the middle of the moor, breathing, with gold-white light fading from the heather around him. Above, the stars. Below, the earth. Around him, the dark and the cold and the ordinary extraordinary fact of being here, being alive, being in possession of himself. He turned back toward the cottage. The lights were on in the kitchen window, warm yellow against the dark. He could see, from this distance and at this speed, the shapes of his parents moving inside. James at the table, probably with his coffee. Lily at the counter, probably with a book. Sirius on the sofa, probably with the fire. He stood on the moor in the cold November night and looked at those lights. Then he walked home. He was quiet when he came in, because it was late and Sirius had fallen asleep on the sofa, in the way of someone whose body had finally concluded that the emotional work of the day counted as physical exertion. James was at the table with his coffee, reading something, and looked up when Harry came in from the cold. "Good run," James said. "Yeah," Harry said. James nodded, went back to his reading. Harry got water from the kitchen, sat across from him at the table. The cottage was warm and quiet. The fire was settling in the sitting room. Outside, the wind moved over the moors and the stars continued their slow, untroubled work. "Dad," Harry said. James looked up. "I've been thinking about what I want to do," Harry said. "After school, in the longer term." "Yeah," James set his book down. Full attention, the way he always gave full attention. "The legal work, the legislation, the rights cases, the reconstruction, that matters, and I'm going to do it. But it's not the main thing." Harry looked at his hands. "I want to understand what I am. The Speed Force, Mum's working on the theory, but I want to work on the practice. I want to know what it's actually capable of, what the limits are, what the connection is between it and magic." He looked up. "I think there are people who could use it. Not in the way I do, not with the same level of access, probably. But I think the Speed Force is a resource, and I think treating it as my private inheritance is the wrong approach." James was quiet for a moment. Then, "You want to teach?" "Eventually," Harry said, "or research, or both. I don't know the shape of it yet." He paused. "I just know it's not finished. What happened tonight is finished. What I am isn't." James looked at his son for a long time. The fire settled in the other room. Sirius snored once and then was quiet. "You know what your mother said when you were born," James said. Harry shook his head. "She said," James stopped, tried again. "She said the first time she held you that you felt like you had somewhere to be." He looked at Harry steadily. "She said it like she was sad about it, like she thought it meant you'd leave." He paused. "But I think she was wrong about what she meant." "How do you mean?" Harry said. "I think you've always had somewhere to be," James said. "But I think the place you're going to, I think it's not away. I think it's here. Bigger, more, but still here." He reached across the table and gripped Harry's arm once, briefly, firmly. "Whatever you build, whatever it is, you build it from here." Harry looked at his father. The warm, direct, unfrightened man who had been sitting on the edge of his cot, at 1 year old, promising to claim him regardless, who had been making pancakes and flying on moors, and saying the thing that needed saying with the faithfulness of someone who had made a decision about who he was going to be and had never revised it. I know, Harry said. I know. He slept in his own room, in the bed that had replaced the cot sometime around age 3, under the ceiling where the Stars and Moon's mobile had been replaced by an actual skylight that showed the real sky. He lay on his back and looked at it, the stars, the same ones he'd seen from the moor, closer now by the small distance of walls and warmth. The speed force was a steady warmth in his chest. He thought about the night that had run backward, about the yellow room and the rotating stars and the 1-year-old who had sat on a cot in the dark, and decided, without words, without language, with nothing but the gold-white current and the memory of a night that hadn't happened yet, to go forward anyway, to go forward and keep going, to use every second of every day that the universe had given back, not to survive it, but to actually fully, completely live it. He had been doing that. He was going to keep doing that. He closed his eyes. Outside, the moors went dark and quiet under the November stars. Inside, the cottage held its people in the specific warmth of a place that had been argued over and worried in and laughed in and cooked in and cried in and been entirely, simply home. Sirius was asleep on the sofa. James and Lily were in their room, talking quietly in the way they did when they thought everyone else was asleep, which was one of the most constant sounds of Harry's childhood. The wind moved over the highland grass. The speed force rested in its riverbed, patient and warm, waiting for morning. Harry Potter was 14 years old. Voldemort was dead. His family was alive. The world was imperfect and interesting and full of things that needed doing, and he was exactly who he had always been, the boy who ran, the current beneath everything, the living proof that if you move fast enough and love hard enough and refuse absolutely to accept the worst version of the night you've been given, you can outrun even the darkest ending and bring everyone home with you. He slept. He dreamed of running. And in the dream, as in the waking, the gold-white lightning moved through the dark like something that had always been there, like something that had never been afraid, like the first light of a morning that was going to last.